My name is Paige. I am 33 years old, and I was exactly 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean when my family decided I was completely disposable. My mother texted to say she canceled my hotel room so my sister's husband could have more space for his fake crypto meetings, telling me to go find a cheap motel. What she did not know was that with one single phone call, I was about to revoke their presidential suite and turn their luxury vacation into a federal crime scene. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The seatbelt sign chimed as our flight began its initial descent into Miami. My phone reconnected to the onboard Wi-Fi and a barrage of notifications instantly flooded my screen. They were all from our group chat newly renamed Miami VIP Weekend. The first message was from my mother, Catherine. Paige Terrence's mother decided to fly down last minute to help with the kids. We needed your room, so I canceled your reservation. Just find a Motel 6 or something nearby. You are 33 and single. You do not need a luxury resort anyway. We will meet you for dinner tomorrow if you can afford an Uber. I stared at the glowing screen. The casual cruelty of her words hit me, but it did not surprise me. My mother had spent my entire life treating my existence as an inconvenient afterthought. While my younger sister Amanda was handed everything on a silver platter, I was expected to be grateful for the scraps. Before I could even process the logistics of being stranded in Miami during peak tourist season, a second message popped up. This one was from Amanda. Sorry, not sorry, Paige. Terrence needs the presidential suite space to host his crypto investor meetings. Do not ruin our vibe this weekend, just because your own life is falling apart. Maybe you can use the time alone at a motel to figure out why your fiancé left you. My finger hovered over the keyboard. I did not cry. I did not type out a frantic emotional paragraph begging them to reconsider. After 33 years of playing the role of the family scapegoat, the daughter whose career was constantly mocked, whose recent broken engagement was treated as a hilarious dinner table anecdote, I was completely out of tears. Amanda had married Terrence 2 years ago. Terrence was an African-American man who loved to project the image of a self-made cryptocurrency billionaire. He drove leased sports cars, wore oversized designer tracksuits covered in logos, and spoke loudly in restaurants about his expanding portfolio. My mother worshipped him. She constantly compared his flashy lifestyle to my supposedly boring practical job. My family genuinely believed I was nothing more than a glorified customer service representative for a generic travel booking website. They had absolutely no idea who I really was or what I really did. I took a slow, steady breath and typed my response. No worries, see you at the hotel. I hit send. Then I closed the messaging app and opened my recent contacts. I tapped the name David, the general manager of the Oceana Grand Resort in Miami. He answered on the very first ring. Ms. Bennett, your flight is landing early. David said, his voice the picture of professional deference. We have your private penthouse fully prepared for your arrival. I am on the tarmac now, David, I said, my voice ice cold. My family is arriving in the lobby shortly. They believe they are checking into the presidential suite using the employee discount. Revoke it. In fact, revoke their entire reservation. There was a brief pause on the line. I did not just work for a travel booking site. I am the Vice President of Global Acquisitions for the Oceana Hospitality Group. I do not just book rooms at the resort. My company owns the building, the land it sits on, and 41 other luxury properties across the globe. I was the one who had personally approved the 85% friends and family discount my mother used to book their lavish vacation. She had called me weeping a month ago, claiming Terrence was having temporary cash flow issues because his crypto funds were tied up in a massive merger. She begged me to use my employee perks to secure the presidential suite so Terrence could host his vital investor meetings and save face. Like an idiot holding on to the last shred of hope for maternal affection, I had authorized the corporate waiver. Understood, Ms. Bennett. David replied smoothly. The 85% corporate waiver has been removed from the reservation under Terrence's name. The system will now require full payment at the current daily rate, which is $8,000 a night. Shall I cancel it entirely? No, I instructed, watching the Miami coastline come into view through the airplane window. Let them try to check in. Let them hand over their credit card. Are you certain, Ms. Bennett? David asked cautiously. If they attempt to cover the rack rate, we will have to honor the booking. They will not be able to cover it, David, I replied. I knew something my mother and sister did not. When you authorize a heavily discounted stay at an ultra-luxury property under a corporate executive's name, the corporate risk assessment team automatically runs a routine background check on the primary guest. My security team had run Terrence's name last Thursday. Terrence was not a cryptocurrency genius. He was running a decentralized Ponzi scheme. He was entirely broke. Worse than broke, actually. The Securities and Exchange Commission had officially frozen all of his bank accounts and assets 5 days ago. The flashy sports cars, the designer clothes, the supposed multi-million-dollar investments were all funded by money he had swindled from vulnerable people. He had been using my mother's retirement funds to finance this entire Miami trip, stringing her along with promises of a massive return on investment. I will be at the property in 45 minutes, I told David. Have security standing by near the front desk. I want to be there when the card declines. I ended the call and slipped my phone into my purse. The flight attendant announced that we had been cleared for landing. As the wheels touched down on the runway, I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me. For my entire life, I had contorted myself to fit into their box. I had swallowed their insults, paid their bills, and smiled through their blatant disrespect. They had always treated me like a supporting character in the grand, glamorous story of Amanda and Terrence. But as I grabbed my designer carry-on bag and stepped off the plane into the warm Florida air, the narrative permanently shifted. I was not the supporting character anymore. I was the author, the director, and the executioner, and I was about to turn their luxury family vacation into a spectacular, inescapable trap. 40 minutes after stepping off the plane, my private car pulled up to the towering glass entrance of the Oceana Grand Resort. The valet opened my door, and I stepped out into the heavy, humid Miami heat. The Oceana was the undisputed crown jewel of our southeastern portfolio. It was a breathtaking architectural marvel of white marble, cascading water features, and massive windows overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. As I walked through the automated sliding doors, the signature scent of sea salt and expensive white orchids washed over me. It was a custom fragrance I had personally selected during our last global corporate rebranding. The lobby was designed to be a sanctuary of hushed luxury, filled with wealthy individuals speaking in low, respectful tones. But right in the dead center of the reception area, a shrill and completely unrefined voice was cutting through the elegant atmosphere like a chainsaw. It was my mother. I paused near a massive tropical floral arrangement to observe the spectacle. Catherine was leaning aggressively over the marble front desk. She was pointing a manicured finger at a terrified junior desk clerk wearing a massive sun hat indoors and demanding to know why she was not being treated like absolute royalty. A few feet away stood my sister Amanda. She was bouncing her toddler on her hip while rolling her eyes at the inconvenience of having to wait in a lobby. Amanda looked exactly as entitled as she had her entire life, fully expecting the world to bow at her feet just because she showed up. And then there was Terrence. My African-American brother-in-law was pacing across the imported Persian rugs in a neon green designer tracksuit that practically screamed new money. He had a phone pressed to his ear, deliberately projecting his voice, so everyone in a 50-foot radius could hear him bragging about blockchain integration and leveraging international assets. It was a pathetic, highly choreographed performance designed to make strangers think he was a titan of industry. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, adjusted my leather tote bag, and walked purposefully across the floor. My mother spotted me first. Her face immediately twisted from entitled outrage into deep, visceral disgust. She dropped her hand from the counter and glared at me as if I had just tracked mud onto a white carpet. "Paige, what on earth are you doing here?" Catherine hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "I explicitly told you in the group chat to go find a motel. You are embarrassing us by walking into a 5-star resort looking like a stressed-out office worker." I did not flinch. I did not shrink away the way I would have just a year ago. "I am not staying at a motel, Mom," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of the intimidation she expected. Hearing my voice, Terrence snapped his phone shut and marched over. He stood exceptionally close to me, trying to use his height and broad shoulders to physically intimidate me into backing down. He looked me up and down with a sneer of absolute contempt. "Come on, Paige. Do not be pathetic. I paid top dollar for this VIP experience. I have multi-million-dollar investors meeting me in the presidential suite in exactly 2 hours. You hanging around here like a sad single charity case is going to completely ruin my image. They do not want to see some depressed spinster who just got dumped by her fiancé. You are killing my aesthetic. Get an Uber and get out of my lobby before I have security throw you out." I looked at Terrence, keeping my expression perfectly blank. The audacity of this scammer calling my hotel his lobby was almost poetic. "You paid top dollar?" I asked, allowing a single eyebrow to rise. I stepped around his towering frame and walked directly up to the front desk. The junior clerk looked relieved to have a distraction from my mother's wrath, but before he could speak, the heavy wooden door to the back office swung open. David, the general manager of the resort, stepped out. He was a distinguished man in an immaculate suit who had been managing luxury properties for decades. Catherine immediately lit up, assuming the manager was coming to grovel and apologize for the delay. "Finally, someone with some actual authority," Catherine snapped, pointing her finger at David. "You need to reprimand this clerk and give us our room keys immediately. My son-in-law is a very important man, and we have been kept waiting for 10 minutes. David did not even look at her. He walked right past my screaming mother, stopped directly in front of me, and gave a deep, respectful bow of his head. "Good afternoon, Ms. Bennett," David said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent lobby. "It is an absolute honor to have you on the property today. Your private penthouse has been fully prepared." He then turned his attention to my gaping mother and a suddenly very still Terrence. "I apologize for the confusion regarding your accommodations," David announced, his professional tone offering absolutely zero warmth. "However, the corporate friends and family discount waiver attached to your booking was officially revoked 3 minutes ago. As a result, the presidential suite has been reassigned to another guest. You currently have no reservation at this property." The silence that followed David's announcement was absolute and suffocating. For a few seconds, the only sound in the sprawling marble lobby was the gentle splashing of the indoor waterfall and the soft instrumental music playing from the hidden speakers. My mother, Catherine, stood frozen. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes darting between the immaculately dressed general manager and my calm, steady face. Then the denial set in. "This is some kind of sick joke!" Catherine shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She slammed her palm against the front desk. "I do not know what kind of stunt my daughter asked you to pull, but I booked that room through a legitimate online corporate portal. I have the confirmation email right here on my phone. Now you will stop this nonsense and hand over my room keys before I call your corporate office and have you fired." David did not flinch. His expression remained a mask of perfect, impenetrable hospitality. "Damn, I assure you this is not a joke," he replied smoothly. "I am the general manager of this property. I have direct access to the central reservation system. The corporate friends and family waiver you utilized was heavily restricted. It requires the sponsoring executive to maintain the authorization. That authorization has been officially withdrawn." Amanda shifted her toddler to her other hip, her face twisting into an ugly scowl. "Paige, what did you do?" she demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Did you log into your little customer service dashboard and mess with our reservation? You are so petty and jealous. Turn it back on right now. Terrence has highly sensitive meetings this afternoon, and my children need to nap in a proper suite. You are ruining our entire vacation because you are bitter that your own life is a miserable failure." I looked at my younger sister. For years, her golden child status had shielded her from consequence. She had always believed my purpose was to facilitate her comfort. Not anymore. "I did not hack a customer service dashboard." "Amanda," I said, keeping my voice low and completely controlled. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my corporate identification. It was not a flimsy plastic name tag. It was a heavy brushed titanium card reserved only for the top tier of executive leadership. I tossed it onto the marble counter. It landed with a sharp, heavy clink that drew everyone's attention. "I am not a customer service representative." I continued, watching my mother's eyes track the gleaming metal card. I am the Vice President of Global Acquisitions for the Oceania Hospitality Group. I oversee 42 luxury properties around the world, and this resort happens to be one of them. I do not just work for the company that owns this building. I am the executive who purchased it. Catherine stared at the titanium badge. Her eyes widened as she read the engraved title. The blood slowly began to drain from her face. You did not book a magical discount through a public portal, Mom, I explained, savoring every single syllable. You booked it using my personal corporate allowance. When you called me crying about Terrence having temporary cash flow problems, I took pity on you. I authorized the 85% waiver so you could pretend to be high society for the week. But since I am just a sad single disappointment who belongs in a cheap motel, I decided I no longer want to subsidize your luxury. The suite is gone. The reality of my position finally seemed to penetrate Catherine's thick wall of arrogance. She looked at me not as her punching bag, but as a woman who held absolute power over her current situation. But before the humiliation could fully set in, Terrence stepped forward. My brother-in-law puffed out his chest, his neon green designer tracksuit rustling as he moved. He let out a loud, mocking laugh, trying to brush off the heavy tension in the air. He looked around the lobby, ensuring that the other wealthy guests could hear him. "Oh, wow," Vice President Terrence mocked, doing a slow, sarcastic clap. "Congratulations, Paige. You climbed the middle management ladder at a hotel chain. That is really cute. But do not stand here acting like you hold all the cards just because you can hand out a little employee discount." He stepped right up to the desk, shoving Catherine aside. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick designer wallet. "We do not need your charity, Paige," Terrence declared loudly. "I was doing you a favor by letting you feel useful. But if you want to be petty, that is fine. I will just buy the suite myself." He pulled out a heavy, solid black metal credit card and slammed it down onto the marble counter right next to my titanium ID badge. It was the kind of card designed to signal extreme wealth, the kind you drop on a table when you want everyone in the room to know you are rich. "Run the card for the full rack rate," Terrence ordered David, his voice dripping with condescension. "What is it? $8,000 a night. Put down $56,000 for the week, plus a $10,000 deposit for incidentals. Let us show your spinster sister what real liquid money actually looks like, Amanda. I make her entire annual salary before lunch trading crypto." Amanda smirked, her confidence instantly returning. She looked at me with an expression of pure triumph. "See, Paige," she sneered. "You thought you could humiliate us, but you just made yourself look desperate. Terrence does not need your little corporate handouts. He is a self-made millionaire. Now get out of our way so we can go up to our suite." I did not say a word. I simply crossed my arms and looked at David. David maintained his flawless posture. He picked up the heavy black metal card with 2 fingers. "Certainly," Sir David said smoothly. "Let us process that for you right now." David turned to his keyboard. He typed in the figures, his fingers moving rapidly over the keys. Terrence stood tall, adjusting the collar of his tracksuit, projecting the image of an untouchable titan of finance. Catherine let out a long breath of relief, her posture relaxing as she prepared to step back into her role as the wealthy matriarch. David slid the heavy metal card through the reader. The lobby was completely silent. Everyone was waiting for the transaction to approve. Instead, the system emitted a loud, sharp, piercing beep that echoed across the marble walls. It was the unmistakable sound of a harsh rejection. David looked at the computer screen. He did not frown. He did not look confused. He looked back up at Terrence, his expression perfectly serene. "I apologize," Sir David announced, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the reception area. "The card has been declined. Code 05. Do not honor." The heavy silence following David's announcement felt like a physical weight pressing down on the lobby. The sharp mechanical beep of the declined credit card seemed to echo endlessly against the marble pillars and towering glass windows. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. The polished facade of my family's fabricated wealth hung suspended in the air, completely shattered, but not yet fallen. Then the panic set in. Terrence lunged forward. His large hand slapped against the marble counter as he aggressively snatched the heavy black metal card from David's fingers. The neon green of his designer tracksuit suddenly looked garish and absurd against his rapidly paling skin. Sweat broke out across his forehead, shining under the warm light of the custom chandeliers. He shoved the card back into his pocket with jerky, frantic movements. "It is a security freeze," Terrence stammered, his voice unnaturally loud and strained. He let out a hollow, forced laugh that sounded like a bark. "My wealth management team puts an automatic lock on my primary accounts whenever I cross state lines. It is a standard anti-fraud measure for high net worth individuals. The bank algorithms just get overly cautious with transactions this large. I just need to call my private broker to clear the hold." Amanda immediately stepped to his side, desperately clinging to the narrative that had defined her entire identity. She nodded vigorously, adjusting the toddler on her hip while shooting a venomous glare in my direction. "Of course it is a security freeze," Amanda declared, raising her chin. "This happens to us all the time when we travel internationally. The bank is just doing its job to protect our assets." She turned her attention back to the general manager. "David," she said, her tone dripping with unearned superiority, "you will hold that presidential suite for us while my husband makes a quick phone call. We are not going anywhere." I took a slow, measured step toward Terrence. The marble floor felt solid and grounding beneath my heels. I did not raise my voice. I kept it pitched at that perfect, devastating volume where it was quiet enough to force them to lean in, but clear enough for the surrounding wealthy guests and hotel staff to hear every single syllable. "Is it a travel freeze, Terrence?" I asked smoothly. "Or is it because those accounts simply do not exist anymore?" Terrence froze. He stopped trying to dial his phone. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and for the first time since I had known him, the arrogant, condescending spark in his eyes was entirely gone. It was replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. "Let me explain how the Oceana Hospitality Group operates." I continued, my voice steady and commanding. "When a global executive like myself authorizes a heavily restricted ultra-luxury suite for a guest, we do not just hand over the keys and look the other way. We rigorously protect our corporate liability. My corporate risk assessment team ran a comprehensive deep dive background check on your financial profile last Thursday." Amanda scoffed, though her hands were visibly trembling. "You have no right to look into my husband's private finances. He is a cryptocurrency pioneer. You are just a bitter, jealous woman, trying to tear down a successful man, because your own fiancé realized you were not worth marrying." I looked directly into my younger sister's eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but pity for her profound ignorance. "Hi is not a crypto pioneer, Amanda," I said, delivering the words with surgical precision. "There is no proprietary blockchain technology. There is no revolutionary decentralized exchange algorithm. He is running a textbook amateur Ponzi scheme. He has been using new investor deposits to pay off his early adopters while skimming millions off the top to lease those sports cars and buy those ridiculous tracksuits you love so much." Terrence opened his mouth to speak, to offer some kind of loud, blustering defense, but his voice failed him. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under the designer fabric. My security team flagged the federal filings immediately. I continued, tightening the invisible noose around his neck. "The Securities and Exchange Commission did not just open a preliminary investigation into your husband. They completely dismantled his entire operation. The federal government froze every single bank account, every offshore crypto wallet, and every tangible asset tied to his name exactly 5 days ago." I took another step closer, forcing Terrence to physically back up against the reception desk. "You are not a millionaire, Terrence," I stated, laying out the absolute truth for the entire lobby to witness. "You are completely, legally, and entirely broke. You have been funding this entire Miami trip using my mother's retirement money, stringing her along with empty promises of massive returns on her investment. You do not even have the liquid funds to buy a cup of coffee at my lobby bar right now." The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I watched the realization hit Amanda like a physical blow to the chest. The arrogant golden child smirk melted right off her face, replaced by a mask of absolute soul-crushing horror. She slowly turned her head to look at the man she had married, the man she had constantly compared me to, the man who was supposed to guarantee her a lifetime of effortless luxury. Terrence refused to meet her eyes. He stared fixedly at the marble floor, his jaw clenched, the illusion of his immense wealth completely shattered. Amanda opened her mouth. A scream of rage and betrayal was building deep in her throat. She was about to tear him apart right there in the middle of my lobby. But before Amanda could unleash her fury, my mother intercepted. Catherine could not stand the public humiliation. She saw the wealthy guests whispering at the lobby bar. She saw the valet attendants watching the drama unfold through the glass doors. The flawless aristocratic facade she had spent decades building was actively burning to the ground, and she would do absolutely anything to stop the bleeding. Her priority was not her daughter's ruined marriage. Her priority was the audience watching her. Enough! Catherine shrieked, her voice cracking with desperate, frantic anger. She shoved herself between Amanda and Terence, using her body to block the impending marital explosion. I will not have my family degraded in public by a jealous, bitter woman. I do not care about any of this corporate nonsense or your fabricated background checks. Catherine shoved her hand into her designer handbag, her movements sharp and aggressive. She pulled out a pristine platinum American Express card and slammed it onto the marble front desk with enough force to make the junior clerk jump. "Run this card," Catherine ordered, pointing a shaking manicured finger at David. "Charge the entire week. Charge the deposit. Charge whatever exorbitant fees you want to my personal account right now. We are going up to our suite and we are putting an end to this pathetic display." Catherine's hand remained planted firmly on top of the Platinum American Express card. Her chest was heaving, her eyes darting around the lobby, desperate to regain control of the narrative. She believed that flashing premium plastic would instantly command respect and wash away the stench of Terrence's public financial ruin. She thought she could simply buy her way out of the humiliation. David, ever the professional, reached out to accept the card. I held up my hand, stopping him instantly. He paused and stepped back, deferring to my authority without a single question. I looked down at the card resting on the polished marble counter. The overhead lighting caught the embossed silver numbers. My eyes locked onto the final four digits, 8142. I felt a strange cold sensation wash over me. It was not shock. It was the absolute crystalline validation of every terrible thing I had ever suspected about my mother. "That is a very interesting choice of payment, Mom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Especially since it has my name printed right beneath yours." Catherine flinched, but she tried to maintain her aristocratic posture. She lifted her chin, trying to look down her nose at me. "It is a joint account," she snapped loudly, ensuring the wealthy guests at the nearby lobby bar could hear her. "I am simply using the family funds to handle this ridiculous situation. Now authorize the payment and give us our suite keys." "We do not have a joint account," I replied. I stepped right up to the counter so I was mere inches from her face. "That is an Oceana Hospitality Group corporate expense card. It is issued strictly to executive leadership for international business acquisitions." Amanda stepped forward, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. She adjusted the toddler on her hip. "Mom, what is she talking about?" I did not take my eyes off Catherine. "Thanksgiving," I said, letting the word hang in the heavy air. "When I arrived at the house, you were unusually eager to take my coat and purse. You insisted on putting them in the guest bedroom so they would not get stained in the kitchen. You spent 20 minutes upstairs. I thought you were just avoiding helping with the cooking, but you were actually photographing the front and back of my corporate credit card." I turned my head slowly to look at my younger sister. "How do you think Mom paid for those 4 first-class tickets you all flew in on today?" Amanda Terrence's bank accounts were frozen by the federal government, so Mom decided to steal my corporate credentials to fund your luxury lifestyle. Terrence actually took a physical step back, looking at his mother-in-law with genuine alarm. Even a man running a decentralized Ponzi scheme knew better than to commit blatant credit card fraud against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The perfectly maintained mask of the wealthy matriarch completely shattered. Realizing she was caught red-handed in front of a lobby full of high society witnesses, hotel staff, and her own golden child daughter, Catherine resorted to the only weapon she had left: pure, unadulterated rage. "I am your mother!" Catherine screamed. Her voice echoed violently off the glass walls, shattering the tranquil atmosphere of the luxury resort. She slammed both of her fists against the marble counter. "I birthed you. I raised you. I paid for your braces, your clothes, the food on your plate. You cost me the best years of my life and you owe this family." I watched her completely unravel. She was not denying the theft. She was justifying it. This was the core of our toxic dynamic laid bare for the entire world to see. To Catherine, I was not a daughter. I was a resource. I was an asset she believed she owned the rights to harvest whenever she saw fit. I sacrificed everything to make sure you had a roof over your head, Catherine shrieked, spit flying from her lips as she pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. Everything you have, everything you are is because of me. What is yours is mine. I have every right to use that card. You are a selfish, ungrateful daughter, and it is your duty to take care of us. I let her scream. I let every single person in that sprawling lobby witness exactly who she was. When she finally paused to take a breath, her chest heaving and her face flushed an ugly shade of purple, I delivered the final devastating blow. "You did not steal from me, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a surgical scalpel. "If you had stolen from my personal checking account, it would be a domestic family dispute. But you stole from a multinational hospitality conglomerate." I picked up the platinum card from the counter and held it up to the light, inspecting the magnetic strip before dropping it into my own pocket. "Using stolen corporate financial credentials to purchase airline tickets that cross state lines does not fall under petty theft," I explained, speaking slowly so her panicked brain could process every terrifying word. "It constitutes federal wire fraud. And because you attempted to use it to book a fraudulent stay at a corporate property, it also triggers a secondary charge of corporate embezzlement." Catherine's eyes darted wildly around the room. The realization of her actual legal peril was finally beginning to penetrate her blinding rage. "You would not," she whispered. Her voice suddenly sounded very small and hoarse. "You would not do that to your own mother." "I did not do anything to you," I replied with chilling calm. "You did this to yourself." When my plane landed and my phone connected to the cellular network, I received an automated fraud alert from American Express regarding $10,000 in first-class airfare. "I did not just call David to cancel your suite. I called the Global Fraud Department." Amanda grabbed her mother's arm, her eyes wide with absolute panic. "Mom, tell her it is a mistake. Tell her you will pay it back right now." "It is too late for that," I said, looking right through my sister. "The charges were officially reported as stolen corporate funds 30 minutes ago. The airline has already handed over the booking IP addresses, which I guarantee will match your home network router in Chicago." Catherine opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The absolute terror of the situation had paralyzed her vocal cords. She looked frantically toward the heavy glass doors of the resort entrance, as if calculating whether she could grab her bags and simply run away into the Miami heat. "I would not try to leave," I advised her, stepping back from the counter and signaling to David to step safely behind the secure reception partition. Through the thick, soundproof glass of the resort's front entrance, a faint, high-pitched wailing sound began to bleed into the quiet atmosphere of the lobby. The sound grew louder and more urgent with every passing second, multiplying as more than one vehicle approached the property at high speed. Bright flashes of red and blue light began to reflect off the towering palm trees lining the circular driveway outside. The sirens were here, and they were not coming for a family dispute. They were coming for a felony. The wailing of the sirens pierced through the thick, soundproof glass of the Oceana Grand entrance. The sound was impossible to ignore. It grew louder and more urgent with every passing second, echoing off the towering white pillars and sweeping through the pristine, orchid-scented lobby. Bright flashes of red and blue emergency lights began to paint the polished marble floors, casting erratic shadows across the faces of my family. Catherine's eyes darted from the flashing lights outside to my completely calm face. The reality of her situation collided violently with her immense, fragile ego. She was not going to be escorted to a presidential suite. She was going to be escorted to the back of a squad car. The aristocratic facade she had spent decades meticulously crafting did not just crack, it disintegrated completely. She realized that the daughter she had treated as a disposable stepping stone was the one holding the absolute power to ruin her. "You ungrateful little witch!" Catherine spat. Her voice dropped to a guttural, venomous hiss that sounded entirely foreign, coming from a woman who prided herself on high society elegance. "I will not let you destroy me." She planted both of her manicured hands on the marble counter and vaulted forward. Her designer handbag clattered to the floor, spilling expensive cosmetics and the stolen corporate card across the polished stone. She lunged at me with a speed fueled entirely by sheer unadulterated panic. Catherine raised her right hand high into the air, her fingers curled tightly, aiming a vicious, desperate slap directly at my face. She wanted to physically put me back in my place, to strike me down the way she had done emotionally for 33 years. I did not step back. I did not blink. I stood my ground, my hands resting easily in the pockets of my tailored blazer. I knew I did not need to defend myself in my own building. Before her hand could even cross the boundary of the reception desk, a shadow moved in my peripheral vision. The resort's head of security, a towering man with years of tactical experience, intercepted her strike flawlessly. He grabbed Catherine's wrist mid-air. With a swift, practiced motion, he spun her around and pinned her arm firmly but professionally behind her back. Catherine let out a shrill, piercing shriek that shattered whatever remained of the lobby's tranquil atmosphere. She thrashed against the security guard's hold, her expensive sandals slipping uselessly on the marble floor. "Let go of me," she screamed, completely abandoning any pretense of dignity. "Do you know who I am? Take your hands off me right now. I will have your job. I will sue this entire hotel and everyone in it." You need to calm down and step away from the desk," the security guard stated. His voice was a low, authoritative rumble. He did not release her arm. He held her securely, preventing her from causing harm to me or to herself. The spectacle was absolute chaos. Wealthy guests at the nearby lobby bar had stopped pretending to mind their own business. Some were openly staring, their champagne glasses suspended halfway to their mouths. The valet attendants outside had paused their duties, watching the drama unfold through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My mother, a woman who had spent her entire life projecting an image of flawless wealth and moral superiority, was currently being physically restrained like a common criminal in the middle of a five-star resort. While Catherine thrashed and screamed, making herself the absolute center of attention, I noticed a subtle movement out of the corner of my eye. It was Terence. My flashy, arrogant brother-in-law had gone completely silent. The booming, confident voice he had used to intimidate the desk clerk just minutes earlier had vanished. Terence knew exactly what those sirens outside meant. With his bank accounts frozen by the federal government and his decentralized Ponzi scheme collapsing around him, he was acutely aware that any interaction with law enforcement would lead to a catastrophic outcome for him. He looked at my mother, struggling against the massive security guard. He looked at his wife Amanda, who was standing frozen in shock, clutching their toddler to her chest. And then Terence made his choice. I took a slow, silent step backward. Then another. He was using the chaotic spectacle of my mother's meltdown as a human shield. He kept his head down, pulling the collar of his neon green designer tracksuit up slightly, trying to blend into the shadows near the extravagant tropical floral displays. He was edging his way toward the side exit of the lobby, the one that led out to the private cabana walkways, and eventually to the street. He was going to abandon his wife, his child, and his mother-in-law to save his own skin. Amanda finally broke out of her paralyzed state. She turned her head, noticing her husband slowly retreating toward the exit, while her mother screamed. "Terence," she called out, her voice trembling with a mix of panic and utter confusion. "Where are you going? Do something. Help Mom." Terence did not stop. He did not even look back at his wife or his child. He quickened his pace, his eyes locked desperately on the glass side doors. He was only 20 feet away from slipping out into the humid Miami evening and disappearing into the crowds. I never made it. Just as Terence reached out for the brass handle of the side exit, a second equally imposing security guard stepped directly out from a side corridor and into his path. The guard crossed his thick arms over his chest, completely blocking the doorway with his body. Terence stopped dead in his tracks. He looked up at the guard, his chest heaving. The bright neon fabric of his tracksuit suddenly looked ridiculous on a man who was visibly shaking with fear. "Excuse me," Terence stammered, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "I need to step outside for a moment. Get out of my way." "I am sorry, sir," the security guard replied, his tone polite but entirely unyielding. "Management has requested that all parties involved in this incident remain in the lobby until the authorities have assessed the situation." Terence whipped his head around, looking frantically for another avenue of escape. His eyes darted to the main entrance, then back to the side doors. There was nowhere to run. At that exact moment, The main automatic sliding doors at the front of the lobby parted with a soft mechanical hiss. The heavy, humid evening air swept into the pristine, air-conditioned space, bringing with it the harsh, rhythmic flashing of red and blue emergency lights. Two Miami-Dade police officers strode into the lobby. Their expressions were stern, their hands resting naturally on their heavy black duty belts. Their eyes swept over the luxurious, chaotic scene, immediately locking onto the struggling woman being held by security and the sweating, cornered man trapped by the side exit. I took a slow, deliberate sip from the glass of complimentary sparkling water David had quietly placed on the counter next to me. I watched the color drain completely from my family's faces. The trap was officially, inescapably shut. The two Miami-Dade police officers approached the reception desk with the kind of calculated caution that comes from years of handling unpredictable situations. Their heavy boots echoed against the marble floor, cutting through the tense silence of the lobby. The lead officer, a tall man with a stern expression, held up his hand to halt the surrounding security guards. He looked from me standing perfectly composed with my glass of water to my mother, who was still pinned by the head of security. Before the officer could even ask a single question, Catherine launched into the performance of a lifetime. The feral, venomous rage that had possessed her just seconds ago vanished completely. It was replaced by an instant, flawless display of absolute victimhood. Catherine let out a breathless, trembling sob. Tears immediately welled up in her eyes, spilling over her mascara and running down her flushed cheeks. "Officers, thank God you are here!" Catherine cried out, her voice quivering with manufactured terror. "Please, you have to help us. That woman standing there is my daughter, but she is deeply disturbed. She is completely unhinged and mentally unstable. She tracked us down to this hotel to ruin our family vacation." Amanda, recognizing her cue, immediately joined the theatrical production. She squeezed her toddler tighter, stepping closer to the officers while shooting me a look of pure fabricated fear. "It is true," Amanda whimpered, putting a shaking hand over her mouth. "My sister has been having a severe mental breakdown ever since her engagement ended. She is insanely jealous of my marriage and my husband's wealth. She followed us here to harass us, and she just tried to physically attack my mother." Catherine nodded vigorously, letting another dramatic sob escape her lips. "She stole my credit card information and tried to cancel our hotel room." Catherine wailed, staring pleadingly at the lead officer. "I was just trying to calm her down and she lunged at me. Please, you have to arrest her. She needs to be locked up before she hurts my grandchildren." I stood there listening to the two women I shared DNA with effortlessly spin a web of lies designed to send me to a psychiatric ward or a jail cell. A year ago, this level of gaslighting would have broken me. I would have panicked, stumbled over my words, and desperately tried to defend myself while they talked over me. Today, I just took another slow sip of my sparkling water. The lead officer looked at me. His expression was skeptical. In his line of work, the person screaming the loudest usually had something to hide, but protocol demanded he investigate every claim. He stepped up to the marble counter and looked me squarely in the eye. Emma, I am going to need to see some identification," the officer said firmly. "And I need you to explain exactly what is going on here." I set my glass down on the counter. "Of course, officer," I replied, my voice calm, clear, and perfectly steady. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my driver's license, placing it on the counter. Right next to it, I placed my heavy brushed titanium corporate badge. "My name is Paige Bennett," I explained, looking directly at Catherine as I spoke. "I am the Vice President of Global Acquisitions for the Oceana Hospitality Group. My company owns this resort. That woman being restrained by my security team is my mother. She used stolen corporate financial credentials to commit federal wire fraud by purchasing first-class airline tickets across state lines. When I revoked her unauthorized access to my property, she attempted to assault me." Catherine let out a loud, mocking scoff, though the panic in her eyes was betraying her. "Do not listen to her," she yelled to the officer. "That badge is a fake. She bought it online. She works at a call center. She is a delusional, bitter woman trying to steal my identity." The officer picked up my titanium badge, feeling its heavy official weight. He looked at David, the general manager, who had been standing quietly behind the reception partition this entire time. David stepped forward, his posture impeccably professional. He did not raise his voice, but the absolute authority in his tone commanded the attention of everyone in the lobby. "Officers, I am the general manager of this property," David stated smoothly. "I can verify with absolute certainty that this is Ms. Bennett, the executive owner of this resort. Furthermore, I can verify that everything she just told you is the exact truth." David reached under the front desk and pulled out a high-definition resort tablet. He tapped the screen twice and handed it directly to the lead officer. "Our lobby is equipped with comprehensive 4K security cameras," David explained. "I have queued up the footage from the past 5 minutes. As you can clearly see, Ms. Bennett remained perfectly still behind the counter. The older woman was the one who became violent, destroyed property, and lunged across the desk in an unprovoked attempt to strike a corporate officer." The lead officer looked down at the tablet. The crystal-clear video played out the undeniable reality of the situation. It showed Catherine screaming, slamming her fists, and lunging violently toward my face before security intercepted her. The officer handed the tablet back to David. His demeanor instantly shifted from investigative neutrality to absolute hardened authority. He turned his gaze slowly toward my mother. Catherine's fake tears dried up instantly. The realization that her performance had failed on camera hit her like a physical blow. She stood perfectly rigid in the security guard's grip, her mouth opening and closing as she desperately searched for another lie, another excuse, another way out. There was none. While the lead officer dealt with the collapse of Catherine's false narrative, the second police officer walked over to the side exit. Terrence was still standing there, cornered by the second security guard. My flashy brother-in-law was sweating profusely, the bright neon fabric of his designer tracksuit clinging to his chest. He looked like a trapped animal. "Sir," the second officer said, his hand resting casually on his radio. "I need to see your identification as well." Terrence tried to puff out his chest, attempting to summon the arrogant, wealthy persona that had been his shield for years. "Officer, this is a massive misunderstanding," Terrence stammered, offering a weak, nervous smile. "I am a highly respected cryptocurrency investor. I have multi-million-dollar meetings to attend. I had nothing to do with whatever my mother-in-law just did. You do not need to bother with me." "ID right now," the officer repeated. The casual tone was gone. It was a direct, undeniable order. Terrence's hands shook as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out his designer wallet and fumbled with the leather slots before finally producing his driver's license. He handed it over to the officer, his eyes darting toward the glass doors leading out to the street. The officer took the license. He unclipped the radio microphone attached to his shoulder epaulette and read Terrence's full name and date of birth into the system, requesting a standard background check. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound in the lobby was the soft hum of the air conditioning and Amanda's quiet, terrified sobbing. Terrence stared at the police radio, his breathing shallow and rapid. He knew exactly what was coming. The radio on the officer's shoulder squawked loudly, breaking the heavy silence. A dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, delivering a string of rapid 10 codes followed by a loud, unmistakable confirmation. The second officer's eyes hardened. He looked up from the driver's license and stared Terrence dead in the eye. He took a deliberate step forward, his hand dropping swiftly from his radio down to the heavy handcuffs resting on his duty belt. Terrence, the officer, commanded, his voice echoing with absolute, unyielding authority. "Place your hands behind your back. You have an active federal warrant." The metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through the marble lobby was the exact sound of my sister's perfect life shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The police officer forced Terrence to turn around, securing his wrists behind his back. The bright neon green fabric of his designer tracksuit bunched up under the heavy steel restraints. He did not fight back. He just stared at the polished floor, his breathing ragged and shallow, instantly defeated by the reality of his own actions. Amanda stood completely frozen for 3 long seconds. Her eyes darted from the silver handcuffs to the stern face of the police officer, and finally to her husband. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. There was no crypto empire. There were no multi-million-dollar investor meetings. Her entire existence, the luxurious image she had weaponized against me for years, was a complete and utter sham. And because Amanda was incapable of taking responsibility for her own life, she immediately directed all of her sudden, terrifying reality right at me. "You did this," Amanda screamed. Her voice was shrill and jagged, tearing through the quiet elegance of the resort. She shoved her toddler into Catherine's arms and marched toward me, her face contorted with a hideous mixture of grief and pure hatred. "You set him up. You called the police and fed them lies because you are so bitterly jealous of my marriage. You could not stand seeing me happy and wealthy while your own fiancé dumped you. You orchestrated this entire ambush just to ruin my family vacation out of pure vindictive spite." She was practically hyperventilating, pointing a shaking finger inches from my face. "You are a monster, Paige. You are destroying my children's lives because nobody wants you. Tell them to let him go right now. Tell them it is a mistake." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at my younger sister, watching her desperately cling to the illusion of a man who was currently being read his Miranda rights by federal authorities. "I did not ruin your marriage, Amanda," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy register that forced her to stop screaming and listen. "Your husband ruined your marriage the moment he decided to run a federal Ponzi scheme. But if you really want to talk about who is destroying your family, we should probably discuss his travel itinerary." Amanda blinked, her anger momentarily derailed by confusion. "What are you talking about?" I did not look at her. I turned my head slightly and nodded toward the general manager. David stepped forward, his posture as immaculate as ever. In his right hand, he held a cheap plastic prepaid burner phone. It was completely out of place in a five-star resort lobby. "When your husband was aggressively slapping his metal credit card on my counter and sweating through his tracksuit, he was a little careless," I explained smoothly. "He dropped this out of his pocket. It slid right under the marble partition." David retrieved it for safekeeping. Terrence whipped his head around. His eyes widened in absolute primal panic. He strained against the police officer's grip, trying to lunge toward David. "Give me that. That is private property. You have no right to look at that." The officer yanked him back, firmly ordering him to stand down. I stepped forward and took the cheap plastic phone from David. The screen was cracked, but it was actively lighting up with a steady stream of incoming text messages. "Normally, I respect guest privacy," I told Amanda, holding the phone up so the glowing screen illuminated my face. "But since the device was abandoned on corporate property, and since it is currently receiving urgent notifications from a contact saved as flight status, I felt it was a security necessity to read them." Amanda stared at the cracked screen. Terrence squeezed his eyes shut, his chest heaving in panicked, rapid breaths. Catherine had gone completely silent, watching the scene unfold with mounting horror while clutching Amanda's toddler. "Let me read them to you, Amanda," I said, my tone completely devoid of mercy. "The first message came through 10 minutes ago. It says I am at the private charter terminal. The pilot says we have clearance to depart for Belize in 1 hour. Do you have the cash from the old bat yet?" Catherine gasped audibly at the insult, her face flushing a deep, humiliated red. Amanda shook her head, taking a slow step backward. "No. No, that is a misunderstanding. It is a business partner." I scrolled down with my thumb. "A business partner?" I asked. "Let us read the next one. It says, 'Hurry up, baby. As soon as you leave your entitled wife and those screaming kids at the hotel, we are gone. They can deal with the feds. Just get the money from Catherine and get to the runway. I cannot wait to start our new life.'" The silence that followed was absolute. The words hung in the air, toxic and devastating. I lowered the phone and looked directly into my sister's eyes. I watched the final devastating piece of her reality snap into place. Terrence was not just broke. He was not just a fraud facing federal prison time. He had meticulously orchestrated this entire Miami trip as an extraction plan. "I brought you here to abandon you, Amanda," I said, delivering the fatal blow with surgical precision. "He planned to check you into the presidential suite using my corporate discount, so you would be distracted by the luxury. He was going to take whatever remaining cash Mom wired to him, walk out the side doors of my lobby, and flee to a non-extradition country with his mistress. He was going to leave you here completely broke and stranded, to take the fall when the federal agents inevitably showed up." Amanda slowly turned her head to look at Terrence. She had spent her entire adult life feeling superior to me because she had secured a wealthy, successful man. She had mocked my career, my relationship, and my value to the family. And now she was staring at a handcuffed criminal who had planned to leave her to rot while he escaped with another woman. Terrence did not defend himself. He could not. The evidence was literally glowing in my hand. He just stared at the marble floor, refusing to meet the eyes of the wife he had fully intended to discard. The glowing screen of the burner phone illuminated the absolute devastation on my sister's face. Amanda stumbled backward, her knees hitting the edge of a plush velvet lobby sofa. She collapsed onto the cushions, clutching her toddler tightly against her chest. She was completely broken, staring at the handcuffed man who had promised her the world and secretly planned to leave her with nothing but federal indictments. While the lead police officer stepped away to coordinate with federal marshals regarding Terrence and his active warrants, the second officer firmly guided my mother toward a heavy, high-backed chair near the concierge desk. He instructed Catherine to sit down, keeping a watchful eye on her, while her wrists remained securely locked in steel cuffs behind her back. Catherine sat there, a woman who had spent her entire life attending charity galas and country club luncheons, now treated like a common criminal in front of an audience of highly affluent resort guests. Her silk designer dress was wrinkled. Her expensive blowout was ruined. She looked around the lobby, seeing the disgust in the eyes of the onlookers and the utter ruin of her favorite son-in-law. But Catherine was a narcissist, and a narcissist never accepts defeat without trying to inflict maximum emotional damage on their way down. Realizing her physical intimidation had failed, and her financial power was a mirage, she shifted her tactics entirely. She fell back on the one weapon she had successfully used to control me for my entire adult life: emotional manipulation. Catherine glared at me from her chair. The fake tears she had cried for the police were completely gone. Her eyes were hard, flat, and filled with a desperate, toxic venom. "Your father would be absolutely disgusted with you," Catherine hissed, her voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the lobby. I paused, turning slowly to face her. "He left me in charge of this family to protect us." Catherine continued, raising her voice so everyone could hear her play the role of the martyred widow. "He trusted me to keep us together. And look at what you are doing. You are tearing your own sister's family apart. You are putting your mother in handcuffs. You are a cold, calculating monster. If your father could see you standing there right now, acting so high and mighty, it would break his heart all over again." I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. A decade ago, invoking my late father would have shattered my resolve. I would have folded, apologized, and done whatever she demanded just to keep the peace. Today I just looked at her and let out a short, sharp laugh. The sound was bitter and completely devoid of humor. "You want to talk about Dad?" I asked, taking a slow step toward her chair. "You really want to bring him into this right now?" Catherine lifted her chin, trying to maintain her moral high ground, despite the steel wrapped around her wrists. "He loved this family. He wanted us to be taken care of. He loved the truth." "Mom," I corrected her, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "And you have not told the truth since the day he died." I watched Catherine flinch, a tiny involuntary twitch in her jaw. 5 years ago, we sat in a dark wood-paneled law office to hear the reading of his will, I said, making sure my voice carried to Amanda, who was still weeping on the sofa. "You were the sole executor of the estate. And you sat there holding a stack of legal documents, and you told me that my father had explicitly written me out of his will." Amanda sniffled, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "You told me he left me absolutely nothing." I continued, my gaze never leaving my mother's face. "You said he was profoundly ashamed of me. You told me he was disgusted that I chose to pursue what you called a useless business degree instead of finding a wealthy husband like Amanda did. You said he wanted all of the generational wealth to go to Amanda and Terrence because they were the future of the family." Catherine swallowed hard. Her posture became rigid. "That was his final wish," she insisted, though her voice wavered slightly under the intense weight of my stare. "He wanted to invest in true success." I nodded slowly, letting her dig her grave just a little bit deeper. "I believed you," I told her. "I was 28 years old, grieving the only parent who ever actually showed me kindness. And I believed that my father died hating me. So I packed my bags. I moved out of the family estate. I rented a freezing, unheated studio apartment that smelled like mold. I survived on dollar pizza slices and instant noodles. I worked 80-hour weeks, missing holidays and birthdays, sacrificing my 20s to climb the corporate ladder from the absolute bottom. I built my empire with my own two hands, while you and Amanda lived in a sprawling mansion funded by his legacy." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my smartphone. But there is a funny thing about climbing the corporate ladder, Mom, I said smoothly. When you become the vice president of global acquisitions for a multi-billion-dollar hospitality conglomerate, you stop taking people at their word. You learn how to look at the data, and you gain access to the most elite financial and legal experts on the planet. Catherine's face drained of the last remaining drop of color. She realized exactly where this was going. Stop talking! Catherine demanded, her voice rising in a sudden panic. This is family business. It does not belong in public. You made it public the second you screamed at me in my lobby, I shot back. I unlocked my phone and opened my secure email application. A month ago, right around the time you called me begging for a luxury hotel discount, because Terrence was allegedly having cash flow problems, I decided to hire a forensic accountant, I explained. I wanted to know exactly how a highly successful cryptocurrency pioneer managed to burn through the massive inheritance you gave him. The accountant pulled the public records of my father's estate. I then petitioned the courts to unseal the original unredacted documents. I tapped the screen, opening a highly confidential PDF file attached to the email. My father never wrote me out of the will. I announced the truth, ringing out like a gunshot. He split the estate perfectly down the middle. Exactly 50% for Amanda and 50% for me. He even left a handwritten note in the margins saying he was incredibly proud of my business degree and wanted his funds to seed my first company. Amanda gasped out loud. She stared at her mother, completely horrified by the scale of the deception. But I never saw a single dime of that money. I continued, stepping right into Catherine's personal space. Because you forged his signature on the final estate distribution documents. You committed massive systematic probate fraud. You stole my entire inheritance, Mom. Catherine shook her head frantically, pulling against her handcuffs. I was protecting the assets. You were too young. You would have wasted it. Wasted it, I asked, letting a cold, mocking smile touch my lips. Let us talk about wasting it. Because the forensic accountant did not just find the forged signature. He tracked exactly where every single dollar of my stolen inheritance went. I held the phone up so Catherine could clearly read the financial summary glowing on the screen. You did not put my money in a savings account. You did not invest it in real estate. You took millions of dollars of stolen generational wealth and you funneled it directly into Terrence's fake cryptocurrency startups. You funded the exact Ponzi scheme that the federal government is tearing apart right this very second. Amanda let out a choked, ragged gasp, burying her face in her trembling hands. The luxurious, untouchable world she thought she commanded was built entirely on a foundation of stolen money and federal crimes. Catherine stared at the glowing screen of my phone, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. The metal handcuffs clinked together loudly as she shook, completely unable to tear her eyes away from the financial summary that laid bare her ultimate betrayal. You want to know what the hardest part was, Mom? I asked, my voice echoing clearly across the hushed lobby of my resort. It was not just the grief of losing Dad. It was the sheer brutal reality of survival you forced on me while you lived like royalty. I was 28 years old. You looked me in the eye and convinced me I was entirely alone in the world. I moved out of the family estate with 2 suitcases and a few $100s to my name. I rented a tiny, unheated studio apartment in a terrible neighborhood that smelled constantly like mildew and damp brick. During the winter, I had to sleep in my heavy wool coat just to keep my teeth from chattering because I could not afford to turn on the radiator. Catherine swallowed hard, her eyes darting away from mine. I did what I had to do, she whispered, though her voice lacked its usual poisonous venom. I was protecting our legacy. You protected nothing. I shot back, taking a deliberate step closer to her chair. I survived on $2 pizza slices for months. I walked 3 miles to work in the pouring rain because I could not afford a monthly public transportation pass. I worked 80-hour weeks, missing every single holiday, taking on every grueling project and fighting tooth and nail for every single promotion. I built my corporate career from the absolute bottom. I clawed my way up into the executive suite of a global hospitality conglomerate through sheer unrelenting willpower. I did all of that while you sat in a multi-million-dollar mansion, sipping expensive imported wine, and funneling my rightful inheritance directly into the pockets of a cheap con artist. Terence kept his head bowed, refusing to look at his mother-in-law or his weeping wife. He just stared at his bright designer sneakers, knowing there was absolutely no escape from the trap I had sprung. The police officer holding him simply tightened his grip, anticipating trouble. "I was securing our future," Catherine insisted, her voice rising in a desperate, frantic attempt to justify her federal crimes. Terence had vision. He promised me the crypto startups would yield a 500% return. I was going to double the estate. I was going to make us untouchable. I was acting as a responsible matriarch. I let out a harsh, unforgiving laugh that made her flinch. "A responsible matriarch. You are the easiest mark Terence ever found. You were so blinded by your own greed and your desperate need to look wealthy to your country club friends that you handed the keys to the castle to a man running a decentralized Ponzi scheme. My security team pulled the records of your recent wire transfers. Do you want to know what you really bought with your generational wealth, Mom?" Catherine stopped struggling against her restraints. The panic in her eyes intensified, shifting into a deep primal dread. "Let us talk about last month," I said, pulling up another heavily redacted document on my phone and holding it up. "Let us talk about the $500,000 wire transfer you authorized on the 14th. You told the bank it was a strategic investment into Terrence's new offshore hedge fund. You told Amanda it was going to pay for a new vacation home in the Bahamas." Amanda looked up, her tear-streaked face turning toward her mother in absolute shock. "Mom, you gave him $500,000 last month," Amanda cried out, her voice cracking. "We told you we needed that money for the private school tuition for the kids. You said the trust was locked." Catherine ignored her golden child daughter. She stared at me, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead, ruining her expensive makeup. "It was a bridge loan," Catherine stammered, licking her dry lips. Terence assured me it was a short-term liquidity bridge for a major acquisition. He showed me the portfolio projections on his laptop. "There was no acquisition, Mom," I said, delivering the devastating truth with absolute calculated precision. That $500,000 did not go to a hedge fund. It did not go to a crypto wallet. And it certainly did not go to a vacation home in the Bahamas. My forensic accountant traced the routing numbers through the bank network. Your money went directly to the United States Department of Justice. The entire lobby seemed to hold its collective breath. Even the police officers standing nearby exchanged surprised glances. The absolute scale of the deception was staggering. "Terence has been under federal investigation for months," I explained smoothly, watching my brother-in-law flinch at the mention of the investigation. "He has been bleeding you dry to pay off his massive legal fees and federal restitution orders, trying desperately to keep himself out of a federal penitentiary. He used your vanity against you. He used your desperation to maintain a wealthy image against you. I took every last cent of the estate my father built, and he handed it over to the government to cover his own fraudulent tracks. And the best part is he failed anyway. They still froze his accounts. They still issued the warrants." Catherine's mouth fell open. She looked like all the air had been violently knocked out of her lungs. Her shoulders slumped, and the rigid, aristocratic posture she had maintained for decades finally collapsed. I took a step back, letting the full weight of the situation crush whatever remained of her delusion. "You are not a wealthy matriarch anymore, Mom. The estate is gone. Your savings are gone. You have multiple fraudulent loans taken out against the family home. You are completely, irrevocably bankrupt. You have absolutely nothing left." For a long, terrible moment, Catherine did not make a single sound. The realization hit her like a runaway freight train. The luxury she prized above her own flesh and blood, the money she had committed federal fraud to steal, the high society status she had worshipped her entire life, it was all reduced to ash. She had traded her actual daughter for a scammer, and she had lost everything in the process. I watched a dramatic, terrifying physical transformation take over my mother. The fake tears completely vanished. The trembling panic subsided. The desperate excuses died in her throat. She slowly raised her head, but she did not look at me. She did not look at the police officers. She did not look at Amanda, who was still sobbing on the sofa. Catherine turned her rabid, feral gaze directly onto Terence. The man who had promised her millions. The man who had taken her stolen inheritance and used it to pay his own criminal debts. The man who was standing just 10 feet away, handcuffed and waiting for the federal marshals. The absolute unhinged fury in Catherine's eyes was chilling, and I knew the real explosion was just about to begin. The tension in the air finally snapped. Catherine let out a sound that was less human and more like a cornered feral animal. Despite having her wrists securely locked in heavy steel handcuffs behind her back, my mother launched her entire body weight directly at my brother-in-law. Terrence was still frozen in shock from the revelation that his extraction plan was ruined, and he did not react in time. Catherine threw herself forward, driving the sharp-pointed heel of her designer stiletto directly into his shin with sickening force. He let out a loud yelp of pain and doubled over, clutching his knee. As he bent down, Catherine used her forward momentum to throw her upper body violently against him. The heavy, sharp-edged diamond pendant resting against her collarbone whipped upward. The jagged platinum setting sliced a deep, highly visible scratch straight across Terrence's cheek. Blood immediately welled up, forming a bright red line against his skin. Catherine was screaming now, completely unhinged and entirely indifferent to the high society guests watching her in horror. "You stole everything from me," she shrieked, kicking wildly at his legs. "You told me it was a secure offshore bridge loan. You told me I was going to double the estate. You took my money to pay your own criminal debts. You are a parasite. I will ruin you." The two Miami-Dade police officers, who had briefly stepped back to secure the perimeter, rushed forward. It took both grown men to physically drag my thrashing, screaming mother off of Terrence. She kicked at the marble floor, her expensive silk dress riding up her perfectly highlighted hair, a tangled, chaotic mess around her flushed and furious face. "Emma, stand down right now, or you will be charged with assaulting a federal suspect," the lead officer barked, struggling to hold her upright as she continued to thrash against his grip. Amanda was shrieking, holding her toddler and pressing herself against the lobby wall. She was completely paralyzed by the violent collapse of her entire world. Her mother was trying to physically destroy her husband, and her husband was bleeding on the floor of a luxury resort. Terrence stumbled backward, reaching a shaking hand up to touch his bleeding cheek. His chest heaved rapidly under his neon green tracksuit. He looked at Catherine, the woman who had endlessly praised him as a financial genius, and then he looked at the stern faces of the police officers. The self-preservation instinct of a career con artist kicked in with absolute terrifying speed. Terrence realized that he was already facing federal wire fraud and Ponzi scheme charges. He needed leverage. He needed a massive bargaining chip to offer the federal prosecutors, and his mother-in-law had just handed herself to him on a silver platter. "Officer, listen to me!" Terrence shouted, his voice cracking with desperate, panicked energy. "I want to make a deal. I want to talk to the federal marshals right now. I have information. I have documented proof of massive financial crimes." Catherine stopped thrashing. She froze, her wide, manic eyes locking onto her son-in-law. "Terrence, shut your mouth," she hissed, her voice trembling with a sudden new flavor of terror. Terrence completely ignored her. He wiped the blood from his cheek and pointed a shaking finger directly at Catherine. "She is trying to blame me for her missing money, but she has been committing federal tax evasion for over a decade. She did not just forge her late husband's will to steal from her daughter. She created an entire network of shell companies to hide those assets from the Internal Revenue Service." Amanda gasped, her eyes wide with fresh horror. "Terrence, what are you doing?" she cried out. "I am saving myself." Amanda, Terrence snapped, not even bothering to look at his weeping wife. He turned his attention back to the lead police officer, speaking rapidly, the words spilling out of him like a ruptured dam. "She came to me. She begged me to help her wash the stolen inheritance money through my cryptocurrency platforms. She knew exactly what she was doing the entire time. She has offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands registered under her maiden name. I have the ledger. I have the encrypted flash drive in my luggage showing every single illegal wire transfer she made to dodge estate taxes. She is a criminal mastermind trying to play the victim to save her own skin." "You lying, manipulative rat!" Catherine screamed, straining against the officer's iron grip with renewed fury. "I gave you that money because you promised me legitimate returns. You swore it was a guaranteed investment. There is no investment." Catherine Terrence yelled back, his voice echoing loudly off the high glass ceilings. You wanted to hide your stolen millions from the IRS, and you thought you were smarter than everyone else. I can hand over the entire paper trail to the feds right now. I can give them everything they need to lock her up for 20 years if you just let me talk to the prosecutor. I stood perfectly still near the reception desk, watching the absolute carnage unfold before my eyes. An hour ago, Catherine and Terrence had walked into my lobby, presenting a united, impenetrable front of high society wealth and familial superiority. They had bonded over their shared hatred of me mocking my career, my relationship status, and my perceived lack of value. They had been perfectly happy to stand shoulder to shoulder while trying to humiliate me and kick me out onto the street. But the moment the money vanished, and the threat of prison became real, that unbreakable family loyalty evaporated into thin air. They were tearing each other to pieces, eagerly serving each other up to the authorities to shave a few years off their own impending prison sentences. It was a bloodbath of pure, unadulterated self-preservation. The lead police officer exchanged a heavy, tired look with his partner. In their line of work, they had seen criminals turn on each other, but the sheer speed and viciousness of this high society betrayal was a spectacle all its own. The officer let out a slow, measured breath. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small laminated white card. The second officer, still keeping a firm grip on Terrence, did the exact same thing. They did not shout. They did not raise their voices to compete with Catherine's screaming or Amanda's sobbing. They spoke with the calm, practiced rhythm of the law permanently closing its jaws around its prey. You have the right to remain silent. The lead officer began reading the Miranda rights directly to my mother. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Right next to him, the second officer read the exact same rights to Terrence, whose bleeding cheek was now matching the panicked, pale shade of his face. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you, the officers recited in near-perfect unison. I looked at the people who had made my life a living nightmare. The trap I had carefully constructed had not just caught them, it had forced them to lock the cage entirely from the inside. The Miranda rights finished echoing through the space. Catherine stood there breathing heavily, the cold reality of her situation finally extinguishing the last remaining embers of her rage. She was a woman who had built her entire identity on the illusion of superiority and untouchable wealth. Now she was just a common criminal caught on high-definition camera committing federal wire fraud and attempted assault. Terrence was not faring any better. The scratch on his cheek, courtesy of my mother's diamond pendant, had stopped bleeding, but his face was a mask of pure terror. He started babbling to the two Miami-Dade police officers, promising them access to offshore ledgers, begging for a deal, offering to wear a wire against Catherine. He was pathetic. But the local officers were not interested in his deals. The lead officer simply adjusted his grip on Terrence's arm and shook his head. You can take that up with the federal prosecutor, the officer said flatly, because we are not the ones taking you in. Right on cue, a convoy of 3 unmarked black SUVs tore into the circular driveway of the resort. They bypassed the valet stand, completely screeching to a halt right outside the main glass doors. 4 men wearing dark tactical vests with the letters U.S. Marshal printed in bold white across the front stepped out into the humid Miami night. They marched through the automatic doors with an intense, terrifying level of authority. They did not stop to ask questions. They walked straight up to Terrence. The local police officer immediately handed over custody. We have it from here, the lead federal marshal announced. Terrence, you are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and fleeing federal jurisdiction. You are going away for a very long time. Terrence finally broke. The arrogant, flashy crypto-millionaire completely dissolved into a weeping, desperate coward. As the marshals grabbed his arms and began dragging him toward the exit, he twisted his head back to look at my sister. Amanda! He screamed, his voice cracking in blind panic. Call my lawyer. Get the money from your mother and bail me out. Call my mother. Do something. I was hauled through the sliding glass doors, his neon green designer tracksuit looking completely absurd as he was shoved into the back of a heavily armored federal vehicle. With Terrence secured, the local police turned their attention back to Catherine. My mother had gone completely rigid. The fight had drained entirely out of her body. The lead officer took her by the elbow and guided her forward. As they walked her across the pristine marble floor, Catherine looked at the high society guests watching her from the lobby bar. The women she had desperately wanted to impress were holding their champagne glasses, whispering and pointing at her ruined designer dress and handcuffed wrists. The humiliation was absolute and inescapable. Just before she reached the exit, Catherine stopped. She turned her head and looked back at me one final time. There were no fake tears left. There were no more manipulative guilt trips or demands for familial loyalty. She just stared at me, realizing that the daughter she had treated like garbage for 33 years was the very architect of her total destruction. I did not smile. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I simply stood my ground in the center of my multi-million-dollar property and stared back at her with eyes as cold and unyielding as ice. I watched the police officer give her a firm nudge, forcing her to turn around and walk out the doors. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass windows and watched the final act of their grand vacation play out on the pavement. The local police guided Catherine into the back of a black and white patrol car, pushing her head down to clear the doorframe. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud. The fleet of federal SUVs and local police cruisers simultaneously engaged their flashing red and blue lights. The vibrant colors washed over the towering palm trees lining the driveway, illuminating the lush tropical landscaping in a chaotic rhythm. The sirens erupted into the night air, a deafening wail that signaled the absolute end of their reign of terror. I watched the convoy peel away from the resort entrance. The taillights grew smaller and smaller as they sped down the coastal highway, carrying my mother and my brother-in-law away to booking cells and federal holding facilities. The sirens faded into the distance, slowly replaced by the gentle rhythmic sound of the ocean waves crashing against the nearby beach. The lobby of the Oceana Grand Resort slowly returned to its standard hushed elegance. The wealthy guests turned back to their expensive drinks. The valet attendants resumed parking luxury cars. The chaos had been completely and surgically excised from my building. I turned away from the window and looked back at the center of the lobby. Amanda was still there. My golden child sister was standing completely alone on the polished marble floor. Her toddler was crying loudly against her chest, and her older child was clutching her leg, terrified by the yelling and the police. Surrounding Amanda was a massive towering pile of matching designer luggage. It was luggage she could no longer afford to check into a hotel room. It was luggage she could no longer afford to fly back home. Her husband was currently on his way to a federal penitentiary. Her mother was sitting in the back of a police cruiser, facing felony charges. Every single bank account she had access to was frozen by the government. The illusion of her effortless, superior life had evaporated, leaving her stranded in a city 1,000 miles from home with absolutely nothing. Amanda slowly lifted her head. The arrogant, condescending smirk she had worn since childhood was entirely gone, replaced by the crushing weight of utter destitution. She looked around the massive, intimidating lobby, realizing that nobody was coming to save her. Then she slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a raw, suffocating desperation. She knew exactly who owned the building she was standing in, and she knew I was the absolute last resort she had left on Earth. Amanda took a slow, unsteady step forward. Her designer heels clicked unevenly against the pristine marble. The arrogant, condescending smirk she had worn on her face since childhood was entirely gone. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was stripped of the mocking, superior tone she had used on the airplane just hours ago. It was replaced by a trembling, raw desperation. "Paige, you have to help me," Amanda whispered, her eyes darting frantically around the massive, intimidating lobby. I stood my ground, my hands folded neatly in front of me. I looked at the towering mountain of matching Louis Vuitton suitcases stacked behind her. Just an hour ago, that luggage was a symbol of her elite status. Now it was just a monument to a life funded by a federal criminal. It was a burden she could not even afford to check into a baggage hold. "My bank cards are declining," Amanda sobbed, her voice rising in genuine panic. She shifted the crying toddler on her hip and reached down with a shaking hand to stroke the hair of her older child. a 5-year-old boy who looked absolutely terrified by the flashing police lights that had just faded into the distance. Terrence's accounts are completely frozen. Amanda pleaded, tears streaming down her flushed face. Mom's cards are being held as evidence by the police. I do not have a single dollar to my name. I cannot even buy formula. You have to let us go up to the presidential suite. The kids are exhausted. They are hungry. They have been through so much severe trauma today. You cannot turn us away. I watched her closely. She was doing exactly what our mother had taught her to do. When you are cornered, when your lies run out, use the most vulnerable people in the room as a human shield to extract pity and evade accountability. I looked at my niece and nephew. They were completely innocent in this disaster. They did not choose to have a scammer for a father or an entitled, malicious enabler for a mother. But I was not going to let Amanda use her children as bargaining chips to secure a luxury vacation she had deliberately tried to banish me from. I am sorry, the children had to witness that. Amanda, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotional manipulation. But do not use your kids as emotional blackmail to get access to a 5-star penthouse. Your husband is currently in federal custody facing decades in prison, and our mother is being booked at the downtown precinct for wire fraud. A luxury resort vacation is officially over. Amanda gasped, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her mascara. Where are we supposed to sleep? You cannot just leave us out on the street in a strange city. We are your family. You owe me this. I am not leaving you on the street, I replied. I turned my head slightly to the side. David. The general manager stepped forward instantly, holding a sleek silver tablet. He had been quietly observing the fallout, waiting for my instruction. David, please book a standard double room at the airport motel. I instructed, making sure to enunciate every word clearly. The Motel 6 specifically. The exact one my mother and sister recommended for me in the group chat earlier today. Also book 3 one-way coach tickets on the first available flight to Chicago tomorrow morning. Charge all of it to my personal account, not the corporate card. Right away, Ms. Bennett, David said, his fingers flying efficiently across the screen. I turned my attention back to my weeping sister. You have a safe place to sleep tonight, and you have a guaranteed way to get your children home tomorrow morning. David will arrange for a basic hotel shuttle to take you to the airport motel, and he will provide you with a $200 cash stipend for food and necessities for the children tonight. David moved gracefully to the front desk. He quickly printed out the motel confirmation and the coach flight itineraries. He placed the papers neatly inside a plain white envelope, pulled 2 crisp $100 bills from the register drawer, and walked back over. He extended the envelope respectfully toward my sister. For a long, agonizing moment, Amanda just stared at the plain white envelope. The reality of the words standard, double room, and coach tickets was short-circuiting her brain. She had spent her entire adult life flying first-class, skipping lines, and demanding VIP treatment. She had built her entire self-worth on being better than me, wealthier than me, and more deserving of luxury than me. The concept of flying coach and sleeping in a budget motel next to a noisy runway was deeply viscerally offensive to her meticulously crafted identity. I watched the desperation in her eyes curdle and twist into something incredibly ugly. The golden child arrogance, which had been temporarily subdued by the absolute terror of the police raid, suddenly flared right back to life in a violent burst of pure entitlement. She looked at the envelope as if David was handing her a live grenade. Amanda lunged forward and slapped the white envelope right out of David's hand. The papers scattered across the pristine marble floor. The motel confirmation slid under a chair. The $200 bills fluttered down, landing right next to the dark scuff marks left by the federal marshal's boots. I am not staying in a filthy, disgusting motel! Amanda shrieked, her face turning a furious, blotchy shade of red. And I am absolutely not flying coach like some kind of peasant with 2 crying children. My husband is a millionaire. This is just a temporary misunderstanding with the federal bank regulators. He will have it cleared up by tomorrow. I deserve the presidential suite. You owe it to me after putting my family through this horrific, embarrassing nightmare. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face, her voice echoing shrilly in the expansive lobby. You are just trying to punish me because you are a bitter, lonely woman who could not even keep a man interested enough to walk you down the aisle. You want me to suffer because you are miserable. I will not accept your cheap, pathetic handouts. I looked down at the plane tickets scattered on the marble floor, and then I looked back up at her furious face. You have no money, Amanda, I stated with absolute unyielding calm. You have no active credit cards. You have nowhere to go. Those cheap handouts are the only thing standing between you and Miami-Dade Child Protective Services taking custody of your kids while you sleep on a park bench. Watch me, Amanda, sneered, her voice dripping with absolute venom and misplaced confidence. She adjusted her grip on her crying toddler and aggressively pulled her smartphone out of her designer purse. I do not need your garbage. I am going to call Terrence's mother right now. She will come pick us up in a private car. And while I wait for her, I am going to expose you on every single social media platform. I am going to tell the entire world exactly how the vice president of Oceana Hospitality treats her own flesh and blood. She furiously unlocked her phone screen, her thumbs hovering over the keypad, her eyes wild with malicious intent. Terrence's mother will be here in 20 minutes, Amanda declared proudly. And then you are going to regret ever treating me like a second-class citizen. I crossed my arms and stared directly into my sister's furious, tear-stained face. Go ahead, I said, my voice cutting through the humid air of the lobby. Call her. In fact, put it on speakerphone. I want to hear exactly how you spin this disaster to your mother-in-law. I want to hear you explain why her son was just hauled away by federal marshals in handcuffs. Amanda sneered, her fingers jabbing aggressively at the glowing screen of her smartphone. You are going to look so incredibly stupid in about 30 seconds, she spat. She thinks the world of me. She is going to hire a private car to come get us. And then we are going to sue you for emotional distress. You will lose your job for this. She tapped the screen and held the phone out in front of her, making sure the speaker function was turned all the way up. The rhythmic electronic ringing tone echoed against the marble pillars. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Amanda stood tall, adjusting her posture. She was already preparing her facial expression, shifting instantly from a venomous attacker into a fragile, helpless victim. She was getting ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. She fully believed that the wealthy matriarch she had been bragging about was waiting in a luxury suite just a few miles away, ready to swoop in and validate her entitlement. On the 4th ring, the line clicked open. Hello, a woman's voice crackled through the speaker. The voice sounded tired and slightly confused. In the background, the distinct muffled sound of a television playing a daytime game show could be heard. Amanda immediately let out a loud theatrical sob. Mom, she cried, pouring every ounce of manufactured distress into her voice. It is Amanda. You have to come down to the lobby right now. It is an absolute nightmare. Paige is completely out of control. She had the police arrest Terrence over some massive misunderstanding, and now she is trying to kick me and your grandchildren out onto the street. You have to come get us. We are stranded. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Amanda. What on earth are you talking about? Terrence's mother asked. Her voice was entirely devoid of the urgent, rushing panic my sister had clearly been expecting. What lobby? Amanda frowned, her perfectly manicured fingernails tightening around the edge of the phone. The Oceana Grand Lobby, Amanda said, speaking slowly as if addressing a confused child. In Miami. Where are you? Are you still stuck at the airport? Did your flight get delayed? Another long pause followed. This time the silence stretching over the speakerphone felt suffocating. My flight! The older woman asked, the confusion in her voice shifting into sharp, irritated clarity. Amanda, I am sitting in my living room in Chicago. Amanda froze. The manufactured tears welling in her eyes suddenly stopped. She blinked rapidly, her brain struggling to process the geographical impossibility of that statement. No, Amanda stammered, her voice losing its theatrical edge. Terrence said you flew down to Miami this morning. He said you were coming to help me watch the kids while he handled his corporate investor meetings. That is why we needed the extra space. That is why Mom had to cancel Paige's hotel reservation so you could stay with us in the presidential suite. I stood perfectly still, listening to the exchange. The pieces of the puzzle were rapidly clicking into place in my mind, forming a picture of absolute, unadulterated malice. Amanda. I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Terrence's mother said firmly. Her voice echoed loudly across the quiet reception area, bouncing off the towering glass windows. I never agreed to fly to Miami. I hate Florida. And I certainly did not agree to babysit while my son pretends to be some Wall Street billionaire. I have not spoken to Terrence in over a month. The color drained entirely out of Amanda's face. She looked like all the blood had been siphoned from her veins. Her jaw slackened and she stared at the glowing screen of her phone as if it had just grown fangs. "What do you mean you have not spoken to him in a month?" Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible over the speaker. The toddler on her hip began to fuss, sensing the sudden rigid tension radiating through his mother's body. "He called me 4 weeks ago, begging for a $50,000 loan." His mother explained, her tone laced with deep, exhausted disappointment. "He told me his bank accounts were experiencing a temporary freeze, and he needed liquid cash to finalize a property purchase in Belize. When I told him I did not have that kind of money, he started screaming at me. He hung up and blocked my phone number. I have not heard a single word from him since." I watched my sister's chest rise and fall in shallow, erratic breaths. The phone in her hand began to tremble violently. "What do you mean, Belize?" Amanda asked, her voice cracking under the weight of the undeniable truth she had just been forced to swallow. The text messages I had read to her from the burner phone were suddenly validated by the one person she thought would save her. "I do not know Amanda. That is just what he told me." "Now what is this about the police arresting him?" the older woman asked, the reality of the situation finally beginning to dawn on her. Amanda could not answer. She could not speak. Her thumb blindly fumbled for the red button on the screen, instantly severing the connection and plunging the marble lobby back into dead silence. I looked at my younger sister. I looked at the woman who had tormented me for my entire life, who had just spent the last 20 minutes threatening to destroy my career and publicly humiliate me on social media. The truth of the situation was staggering. The entire premise of the text message our mother had sent me mid-flight was a complete fabrication. They did not need my hotel room for Terrence's mother. Terrence's mother was never coming to Miami. There was no scheduling conflict. There was no logistical emergency that required my sacrifice. They simply wanted to hurt me. Catherine and Amanda had colluded to cancel my reservation while I was trapped 30,000 feet in the air, solely for the thrill of degrading me. They wanted the perverse satisfaction of forcing me to beg for a cheap motel room while they paraded around a luxury resort. It was not a practical decision regarding space. It was a calculated, malicious act of emotional violence designed to remind me that I was entirely worthless to them. And they had done it all while blissfully unaware that the man they were prioritizing was actively planning to steal their money and abandon them to federal authorities. Amanda slowly lowered her phone. Her hand was shaking so badly she could no longer maintain her grip. The smartphone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered loudly against the marble floor, landing right next to the white envelope containing the coach plane tickets I had offered her just moments before. She had no husband, she had no money, she had no mother-in-law flying in on a private jet to rescue her. She had absolutely no lies left to hide behind. The golden child was completely, irreparably broken. The sharp crack of the smartphone hitting the marble floor echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous lobby. The screen splintered into a spiderweb of shattered glass. The line to Chicago disconnected instantly, cutting off the confused voice of Terrence's mother and plunging the space around us into a suffocating, heavy silence. Amanda stared blankly at the broken device near her designer heels. Her entire body began to tremble. The rapid, involuntary shaking started in her hands and quickly spread to her shoulders, racking her frame as the colossal weight of the truth finally crushed the last remaining pillars of her fabricated reality. I did not move to comfort her. I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer magnitude of the revelation wash over me. My mind raced backward, analyzing the sequence of events that had brought us to this exact moment. I thought about the text message I had received while descending over the Atlantic Ocean. I thought about the smug, mocking tone of her messages. I looked directly into my younger sister's wide, bloodshot eyes. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating absolute clarity. "She is in Chicago, Amanda," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "She has been in Chicago this entire time. She was never coming to Miami. She has not spoken to your husband in a month." Amanda opened her mouth, but only a dry, raspy wheeze escaped her throat. She hugged her toddler tighter, shaking her head in slow, jerky movements, as if she could somehow physically reject the facts being presented to her. "There was no logistical emergency." I continued, taking a deliberate step toward her. There was no scheduling conflict. There was absolutely no need to free up extra space in the presidential suite. You did not cancel my room because you needed it for a babysitter. The raw, ugly truth hung in the air between us, completely stripping away the thin veneer of practicality my family had used to justify their cruelty. You and Mom sat in those stolen first-class seats sipping champagne paid for by my corporate expense account, and you decided it would be entertaining to degrade me, I stated, laying their malice bare for everyone in the lobby to hear. You knew I was trapped 30,000 feet in the air. You knew I could not defend myself. You completely fabricated a story about Terrence's mother just so you could experience the perverse thrill of kicking me out onto the street. You wanted to force me to beg for a filthy motel room while you paraded around my luxury resort. It was not Mom. Amanda choked out her voice, cracking violently. It was a lie. A desperate, pathetic attempt to shift the blame to the woman who was currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser. Mom told me to send the text. She made me do it. I scoffed, the sound sharp and unforgiving. Do not insult my intelligence, Amanda. I read the group chat. I saw your message. You told me you were not sorry. You told me not to ruin your vibe. You wanted to humiliate me because it is the only way you know how to feel powerful. You built your entire identity on being better than me, and you were willing to leave your own sister stranded in a strange city just to feed your massive, fragile ego. And what did that ego buy you, I asked, gesturing broadly toward the mountain of matching designer luggage stacked behind her. You worshipped a man who used you as a prop. Terrence was not a crypto pioneer. He was a federal criminal who used your vanity against you. He let you brag to your friends about your wealthy lifestyle, while he secretly packed his bags and plotted to leave you holding the bag for his felonies. I was willing to abandon you and his own children in a hotel lobby so he could escape to Belize with another woman. The absolute reality of her situation finally shattered the last remnants of Amanda's golden child arrogance. The realization that she had been utterly discarded by the man she considered her trophy husband broke her completely. Amanda's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the polished marble floor, landing hard amid her expensive bags and the scattered papers she had swatted away just minutes earlier. She buried her face in her toddler's shoulder and began to wail. It was a loud, ugly, visceral sound of pure despair. Her 5-year-old son clung to her arm, crying hysterically, terrified by his mother's complete psychological breakdown. For her entire life, Amanda had been shielded from consequence. Catherine had always been there to bail her out, to excuse her behavior, to tell her she was superior to everyone else. Terrence had provided the illusion of infinite wealth and untouchable status. Now Catherine was facing federal wire fraud charges. Terrence was in the custody of United States Marshals. The bank accounts were frozen. The credit cards were declined. Amanda was 30 years old, possessing no job skills, no money, and no safety net. She was entirely alone, sitting on the floor of a resort. She could not afford relying entirely on the mercy of the sister she had spent her life tormenting. "Page, please," Amanda sobbed, looking up at me from the floor. Her mascara was running down her face in thick black streaks. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. You are right. It was cruel. It was a sick joke. I was just trying to impress Terrence. I was trying to keep Mom happy. Please do not leave us here. I do not have anywhere to go. I cannot pay for a flight. I cannot even buy dinner for the kids. I am begging you." I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet. A decade ago, the sight of my sister crying would have triggered my deeply ingrained instinct to fix everything. I would have handed over my credit card, booked her the suite, and apologized for making her feel bad about her own terrible choices. But that version of me no longer existed. That version of me had been slowly, methodically killed by their endless disrespect. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel vengeance. I just felt a profound, liberating sense of emptiness. She was nothing to me. I crouched down slightly. My tailored blazer shifted perfectly as I reached out and picked up the plain white envelope containing the motel confirmation and the coach airline tickets. I gathered the 2 crisp $100 bills that had fluttered to the ground earlier. I stood back up, smoothing my jacket. I held the envelope and the cash out toward her. "Take it," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. Amanda looked at the envelope. Her shaking hand reached up and she took the papers from my grip. She did not argue this time. She did not scream about deserving the presidential suite. She clutched the budget motel confirmation to her chest like a lifeline because she finally understood it was the absolute best she was ever going to get. I turned my head and looked at the general manager. David, please have security assist my sister with her luggage. Escort her to the airport shuttle outside. Ensure she boards safely. Right away, Ms. Bennett, David replied, signaling to the two security guards standing by the entrance. The guards approached and began loading the heavy designer suitcases onto a brass luggage cart. Amanda slowly pulled herself up from the marble floor, balancing her toddler on her hip and grabbing her son's hand. She looked completely hollowed out, a ghost of the vibrant, cruel woman who had walked through those glass doors an hour ago. She did not look at me again. She simply turned and followed the security guards toward the exit, dragging her feet as she walked out of my luxury resort and out of my life. I watched the automatic doors slide shut behind her. Have a safe flight, Amanda. The heavy glass doors slid completely shut, sealing off the humid night air and the flashing red and blue lights that still painted the circular driveway. Through the thick, soundproof panes, I watched my younger sister make her final departure. The two resort security guards pushed the brass luggage carts loaded with Amanda's towering mountain of matching designer suitcases. The recognizable designer print which she had flaunted just an hour ago as a weapon of sheer superiority now looked gaudy and utterly ridiculous. She was a single mother with zero income, walking toward a complimentary airport shuttle while dragging two crying children behind her. The lobby of the Oceana Grand Resort had been captivated by the spectacle. Wealthy guests, venture capitalists, and high society socialites had abandoned their conversations at the lobby bar to watch the entire downfall. In the Amanda desperately wanted to belong to. Reputation was the only currency that actually mattered. And right now, her reputation was entirely bankrupt. I could hear the hushed murmurs rippling through the elegant space. People were pointing, leaning in to whisper to their companions, sipping their expensive cocktails as they watched the disgraced golden child being marched out of the building. Amanda tripped slightly on the edge of the carpet near the exit, her expensive heel catching the heavy fabric. She stumbled, clutching her toddler tightly, and looked back through the glass one last time. Her eyes were completely hollow. She did not find a single sympathetic face looking back at her from the crowd. She had built her entire life around the concept of being vastly better than everyone else, and the moment her fake wealth evaporated, the high society crowd she worshipped discarded her instantly. The security guard opened the sliding door to the plain white airport shuttle van. Amanda climbed inside, her figure disappearing into the dark interior. The van pulled away from the curb, taking the last remnants of my toxic family with it. I stood perfectly still in the center of the vast marble reception area. For the first time in 33 years, the crushing, suffocating weight of my family's expectations was entirely gone. The heavy knot of anxiety that usually lived right behind my ribs dissolved. My chest expanded as I took a deep, steadying breath. The chaotic, frantic energy that my mother and sister had dragged into the building was completely excised. The space felt purified. The soft, ambient instrumental music playing from the hidden speakers seemed to swell, filling the silence left in their wake. The gentle, rhythmic splashing of the indoor waterfall sounded crisp and soothing against the stone fixtures. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the signature scent of the resort wash over me. The clean, sharp aroma of sea salt and blooming white orchids rushed into my lungs. It smelled like victory. It smelled like absolute uncompromising peace. For my entire life, Catherine and Amanda had conditioned me to believe I was a supporting character in their grand delusional narrative. They had demanded my financial support while actively mocking my career. They had expected me to smile through their insults and thank them for the privilege of being degraded. They had genuinely believed I would surrender my hotel room, absorb the cost of a cheap motel, and apologize for ruining their vacation simply because they demanded it over a group chat. They fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. I had not just survived their abuse, I had utilized every single ounce of that rejection as fuel to build a global empire. I had constructed a fortress of wealth, legal protection, and absolute corporate power that they could not even begin to comprehend. And when they finally pushed me too far, I did not just close the door on them. I let them lock themselves inside a prison of their own making. The soft sound of leather shoes, approaching against the polished marble floor, brought my attention back to the present moment. I turned my head to see David stepping out from behind the reception partition. The general manager was no longer holding a security radio or coordinating with local law enforcement. His impeccable posture was relaxed, yet fully deferential. He walked toward me carrying a highly polished silver tray. Resting on the gleaming surface was a tall crystal flute filled with vintage champagne, the bubbles rising in a perfect golden column. Right beside the glass sat a sleek, heavy black keycard, embossed with the Oceana corporate crest. David stopped a polite distance away and extended the tray toward me. A genuine warm smile touched the corners of his eyes, a stark contrast to the rigid professionalism he had maintained during the police intervention. The local authorities have cleared the driveway and the shuttle has officially left the premises, David reported, his voice smooth and incredibly professional. The lobby has been entirely secured. The disturbance is completely resolved. I reached out and picked up the heavy black keycard. The matte finish felt cool and solid against my palm. I then took the crystal flute of champagne by the stem. Thank you for handling the logistics so efficiently, David, I said, maintaining my professional demeanor while allowing a small victorious smile to form on my own lips. Your security team performed flawlessly tonight. Please ensure they receive a substantial bonus on their next payroll cycle for dealing with that level of hostility. It is our absolute pleasure to assist you, David replied, giving me a slight respectful bow of his head. We have ensured your luggage was brought up through the private executive elevator. The catering team has also prepared the tasting menu you requested, and it is currently being set up in the dining area overlooking the ocean. He gestured gracefully toward the private gold-plated elevator doors at the far end of the lobby, a secure lift designated exclusively for high-profile guests and corporate ownership. Your suite is ready, Ms. Bennett. I stepped into the private gold-plated elevator hidden at the back of the lobby. I swiped the heavy black keycard over the security sensor and pressed the button for the penthouse floor. The doors glided shut, instantly silencing the faint ambient noise of the resort below. As the elevator ascended rapidly, I took a slow sip of the vintage champagne. The crisp, chilled liquid tasted incredible. It tasted like closure. The elevator chimed softly, opening directly into the grand foyer of the presidential suite. I stepped out onto the polished hardwood floor and let out a long, steady breath. The suite was an absolute masterpiece of modern luxury. Massive floor-to-ceiling glass walls wrapped around the entire living area, offering an unobstructed panoramic view of the dark Atlantic Ocean. The moonlight reflected off the rolling waves, casting a silver glow over the imported Italian leather furniture and the grand piano resting quietly in the corner. In the adjacent dining area, the catering team had already arranged a flawless tasting menu on the long marble table, perfectly executing the instructions David had given them. I walked slowly through the sprawling, opulent space. My heels sank into the plush custom rugs. I trailed my free hand along the back of a pristine white sofa, taking in the sheer scale of the environment my company had built. This was the exact room Terrence had planned to use as his fake command center to impress non-existent crypto investors. This was the room my mother and sister had tried to banish me from so they could pretend to be high society royalty. Standing in the center of this multi-million-dollar sanctuary, my mind inevitably flashed back to a very different room. 5 years ago, after Catherine had looked me dead in the eye and falsely told me my father had written me out of his will, I had packed my bags and left the family estate. I had rented a cramped, windowless studio apartment in a terrible neighborhood. It was the only place I could afford on a junior analyst salary while paying off massive student loans. I vividly remembered the brutal winter months in that apartment. The landlord refused to fix the ancient radiator. The damp cold would seep through the thin brick walls and settle deep into my bones. The streetlights from the alleyway would flicker through the cheap blinds, casting ugly shadows across the peeling linoleum floor. I used to sleep in my heavy wool winter coat, wearing 2 pairs of socks and a beanie, just to keep my teeth from chattering. I remembered sitting on a stained mattress, eating cheap instant noodles and looking at my bank account balance, which frequently hovered around $17. Catherine had left me to freeze in that miserable box while she funneled my rightful inheritance into Terrence's pockets. She had wanted to break me. She had wanted me to come crawling back begging for her conditional affection and a tiny scrap of financial support. She thought isolation and poverty would force me to submit to her control. But I never crawled. I harnessed every single ounce of that freezing, miserable desperation and forged it into pure, unadulterated ambition. I worked 80-hour weeks. I outsmarted, outworked, and outlasted every single person in my corporate division. I did not just climb the ladder. I practically sprinted up it. Now I was standing in a penthouse suite that cost $8,000 a night in a building that I personally acquired for a global hospitality conglomerate. The contrast between that freezing studio and this glass-walled palace was staggering. I had not just survived my family's betrayal, I had achieved total undeniable victory. I set my empty champagne flute down on the marble dining table and walked toward the expansive glass doors leading to the private terrace. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped out into the warm, humid Miami night. The ocean breeze whipped through my hair, carrying the sharp, clean scent of the sea. I walked to the edge of the glass railing and looked down at the resort grounds far below. The circular driveway was empty. The police cruisers were gone. The chaotic energy of Catherine and Amanda had been completely erased from the property, leaving only tranquility in its wake. I closed my eyes, letting the warm air wash over my face. I was fully prepared to order a second glass of champagne, eat my tasting menu, and sleep for 12 uninterrupted hours in a king-sized bed. Then the sharp vibration of my smartphone broke the silence. I pulled the device from my blazer pocket and glanced at the glowing screen. I expected it to be a panicked text from Amanda, or perhaps an update from my corporate security team regarding the police presence downtown. But the name flashing on the caller ID made me pause. It was the senior managing partner at the most prestigious law firm in Chicago. He had been my family's dedicated estate lawyer for over 2 decades. He was the man who had overseen my late father's trusts, and he was the man who currently handled all of Catherine's legal and financial affairs. This lawyer never called me. He had not spoken to me directly since the day Catherine falsely informed me I was disinherited. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello, Richard." "Paige, thank God you answered," Richard gasped. His normally composed, deep voice was frantic, breathless, and completely stripped of its usual professional polish. He sounded like a man standing on the deck of a sinking ship. "Paige, you need to listen to me right now. I just got a call from the Miami-Dade Police Department. Your mother has been arrested on felony fraud charges. The federal authorities have seized Terrence's assets. The entire estate is in absolute jeopardy. You have to tell me what is going on down there." I stood on the balcony of the presidential suite, listening to the frantic, shallow breathing of the most powerful estate lawyer in Chicago. Richard was a man who charged $2,000 an hour to make wealthy people's problems quietly disappear. He was accustomed to dealing with discreet tax loopholes and silent settlements behind closed doors. Tonight, however, he sounded like a man watching a hurricane tear directly through his own living room. "I know exactly what is going on down here, Richard," I said, keeping my voice pitched at a calm conversational volume. "I am the one who had my mother arrested. I am the one who handed Terrence over to the federal marshals." There was a sharp, stunned intake of breath on the other end of the line. The sound of shuffling papers in Richard's office completely stopped. "Paige, you cannot be serious," Richard gasped. The polished, authoritative tone he had used to intimidate me for years was completely gone. "This is a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. Your mother is currently sitting in a holding cell at the Miami-Dade precinct. The local police contacted me because I am listed as her primary legal counsel. They are preparing to charge her with felony credit card fraud. Do you have any idea what this will do to the family name? The press will have a field day. We need to post her bail immediately and secure a local defense attorney before she says something incriminating on the public record." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my vintage champagne. The ocean breeze whipped through my hair, carrying the sharp scent of salt water. "I am not posting her bail, Richard," I replied smoothly. "I am not authorizing a single cent from my accounts to help her. You can let her sit right there on that concrete bench. Paige, you have to listen to reason. Richard pleaded, his voice rising in pitch. She is your mother. She needs a massive wire transfer to secure a bondsman right now. The magistrate deemed her a severe flight risk because of her high net worth and the severity of the federal wire fraud charges. I need your direct authorization to release emergency funds from the primary family trust. I set my crystal flute down on the outdoor patio table. The time for entertaining my family's delusions of grandeur was officially over. There are no emergency funds, Richard Weiss stated, my voice turning to absolute ice. And you are not going to lift a single finger to bail her out. I am giving you a direct, non-negotiable order. You are going to formally and permanently sever every single legal tie I have to Catherine and to that estate. You will remove my name as her next of kin. You will dissolve any remaining joint liability clauses tying me to her property. I want a complete surgical legal amputation by tomorrow morning. Richard scoffed, a desperate sound of disbelief. I cannot just abandon her, Paige. I have a fiduciary duty to your father's legacy. He left me in charge of protecting this family's wealth. He would want us to protect the estate. My father wanted me to have 50% of that estate. Richard, I shot back, dropping the polite facade entirely. A legal fact you conveniently missed when my mother forged his signature on the final distribution documents 5 years ago. The silence on the line was so absolute, I could hear the faint hum of the city traffic miles below my penthouse. What did you just say? Richard whispered. The sheer terror in his voice was palpable. You heard me, I said, stepping closer to the glass railing of the balcony. My mother committed massive probate fraud right under your nose. She forged my father's signature to steal my half of the generational wealth, and she used it to fund Terrence's decentralized Ponzi scheme. A scheme that the Securities and Exchange Commission is currently tearing apart. Paige, I had absolutely no idea. Richard stammered, his words tripping over each other in a blind panic. I authenticated those documents based on her testimony. If the federal government discovers that fraudulent transfers occurred under my firm's supervision, we could face catastrophic malpractice suits. We could be charged as accessories to federal financial crimes. That is exactly right, Richard. I confirm, tightening the invisible noose around his career, which is why you are going to do exactly what I tell you to do. You are officially initiating a full hostile forensic audit into my late father's estate. You are going to rip her financial history apart. You will trace every single dollar my mother stole from me and funneled into Terrence's fraudulent accounts. I paused, ensuring he was hanging on every single word. And when you finish that audit, Richard, you are not going to bury it to protect your firm. You are going to take the entire ledger, every forged document, and every illegal wire transfer, and you are going to hand it directly over to the Internal Revenue Service and the federal prosecutor. You are going to serve my mother to the authorities on a silver platter to save your own skin. I listened to the frantic sound of computer keys clacking on the other end of the line. Richard was desperately logging into the firm's secure server, pulling up Catherine's active financial profiles to verify the massive disaster I had just laid at his feet. Oh my God, Richard breathed out. The sound was ragged and completely devoid of hope. What is it? I asked, leaning against the glass railing. Paige, you need to hear this, Richard said, his voice shaking violently. It is so much worse than a drained trust fund. It is worse than the offshore wire transfers. I was breathing heavily, clicking rapidly through digital files. She did not just empty the liquid cash to fund Terrence, Richard revealed, his tone dropping to a horrified whisper. She leveraged the physical assets. She took out a massive high-interest second mortgage on the family estate in Chicago. She used the ancestral home as collateral to give Terrence that final $500,000 bridge loan last month. I stood perfectly still. The sheer scale of my mother's absolute vanity and staggering stupidity was almost hard to process. She had literally bet the roof over her head on a con artist just to maintain the illusion of high society superiority. The accounts have been completely dry for months. Richard continued, reading the grim financial reality directly from the bank ledgers. She has been defaulting on the mortgage payments since the winter. The bank issued the final notice of default last week. Richard stopped typing. The absolute finality of the situation hung heavily through the phone speaker. They are foreclosing on the property tomorrow morning, Paige, the lawyer announced. The locks will be changed by noon. Catherine has lost the house. Amanda has nowhere to return to. They have absolutely nothing left. I looked out over the dark, sprawling expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The crashing waves sounded rhythmic and incredibly peaceful. My mother had tried to banish me to a cheap motel and leave me with nothing solely for her own entertainment. Instead, she had just rendered herself entirely homeless while sitting in a holding cell. The poetic justice was absolute and flawless. "Then I highly suggest she gets comfortable on that concrete bench," I replied, my voice a bloodless, icy verdict. "Because she has nowhere else to go." I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button ending the call and terminating my family's legacy in one single effortless motion. I placed the phone face down on the smooth surface of the patio table and left it there. I walked back into the temperature-controlled comfort of the penthouse, leaving the crashing waves and the absolute ruin of my mother's life behind me. I climbed into the massive king-sized bed, pulled the heavy, crisp white duvet over my shoulders, and fell into the deepest, most restorative sleep of my entire life. When I opened my eyes again, the world had completely transformed. The automated blackout curtains silently glided open, commanded by the preset morning schedule of the suite. A breathtaking Miami sunrise flooded the room. The sky was burning with vibrant shades of gold coral and deep crimson reflecting off the calm surface of the Atlantic Ocean. The light poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, warming the imported Italian leather furniture and casting a brilliant glow across the pristine space. I sat up against the plush headboard and took a deep, steadying breath. There was no anxiety tightening my chest. There was no lingering dread about what manipulative text message or passive-aggressive phone call might be waiting to ruin my day. There was only the absolute unbreakable silence of a life finally entirely under my own control. I reached over to the mahogany nightstand and picked up my smartphone. The screen was completely lit up, overloaded with a staggering backlog of notifications. The local Miami news affiliates had not wasted a single second. The story of a high society matriarch being hauled out of a five-star luxury resort in handcuffs, alongside a federal fugitive connected to a massive cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme, was prime morning news material. The footage of my mother thrashing against resort security and Terrence being shoved into a federal SUV had already circulated through the wealthy suburban networks of Chicago. My personal inbox was a disaster zone of frantic, panicked energy. There were dozens of text messages from extended family members. These were aunts, uncles, and cousins who had not bothered to speak to me in over a decade. These were the exact same people who had happily attended my mother's lavish holiday parties, drinking her expensive wine while listening to her mock my career and call me a miserable spinster. They had all willingly participated in the cruel, comfortable narrative that I was the family failure. Now their tone had drastically changed. My screen was filled with long, rambling paragraphs of feigned concern and desperate curiosity. A cousin I had not seen since high school texted to ask if the news reports were true and if I could secure him a job at my corporate office. An aunt who had openly laughed when my engagement ended sent a voice note crying about how worried she was for Amanda, begging me to wire funds to help my sister fly home. They were demanding details, offering unsolicited advice, and trying to position themselves as sympathetic allies now that the power dynamic had violently shifted. They wanted me to step right back into my assigned role as the family fixer. They expected me to clean up the catastrophic mess my mother and sister had created simply because we shared a bloodline. I looked at the endless stream of notifications. I did not read the pathetic excuses. I did not listen to the dramatic weeping voice notes. I did not type out a single response defending my actions or explaining the intricate details of the probate fraud. I simply tapped the settings icon on my messaging application. I highlighted the first name on the long list of extended relatives. I pressed delete and then I pressed block. I moved to the next name, delete, block. I went down the entire list methodically and surgically, removing every single person who had ever enabled my mother's abuse. With every tap of my finger, I severed another toxic root, tying me to a past I no longer recognized. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I was purging the rot from my life with absolute clinical precision. When I reached the bottom of the list, my inbox was completely clear. My phone was silent. The digital execution was finished. I set the phone down and walked into the sprawling, marble-lined master bathroom. I stood under the rainfall shower, letting the hot water wash away any lingering traces of the chaotic night before. When I stepped out, I did not put on resort wear. I was not in Miami just to orchestrate a family takedown or sip champagne by the pool. I was a top-tier corporate executive and I had a job to do. I opened the cedar-lined walk-in closet and bypassed the casual vacation clothes. I pulled out a razor-sharp charcoal gray designer power suit. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and black stiletto heels. I fastened a classic, heavy luxury watch around my wrist, the one I had bought for myself the day I made vice president. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, uncompromising style. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me was not a victim. She was not a scapegoat, and she was certainly not a sad charity case. She was a woman operating fully and unapologetically in her own power. I grabbed my leather briefcase, walked out of the presidential suite, and took the private elevator down to the resort's executive mezzanine. The doors slid open to reveal a massive glass-walled boardroom overlooking the ocean. My entire acquisitions team was already gathered around the polished mahogany table, reviewing the final legal portfolios and financial projections. At the far end of the room sat the ownership group of a rival boutique hotel chain. They looked up nervously as I walked into the room, instantly recognizing the authority in my stride. "Good morning, everyone," I said, setting my briefcase down at the head of the table. I took my seat and opened the primary financial dossier. While my mother was waking up on a concrete bench in a Miami holding cell, and my sister was desperately trying to navigate a budget airline terminal with no money and a shattered ego, I was preparing to do exactly what I did best. "Let us get started," I announced to the room, projecting absolute unshakable confidence. "We have a $150 million acquisition deal to close today." 6 months have passed since that morning in Miami. The corporate acquisition I closed that day solidified my promotion to executive vice president, but the personal closures I made were infinitely more valuable. The absolute silence from my former family has been the greatest luxury I have ever acquired. Let me give you a quick update on the people who tried to leave me stranded and freezing in their shadow. Terrence is currently serving a 12-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. The Department of Justice did not offer him a single favorable plea deal. Once federal investigators seized his encrypted hard drives and burner phones, they found a mountain of evidence detailing his wire fraud, investor manipulation, and offshore tax evasion. They completely buried him. The neon green designer tracksuits he loved to flaunt have been permanently replaced by a stiff standard issue orange jumpsuit. The flashy crypto bro, who used to scream at front desk clerks, now spends his days working in the prison laundry facility, making less than $1 an hour. The man who tried to pretend he was an untouchable billionaire is now strictly regulated on exactly how much he is allowed to spend at the prison commissary. Catherine's fall from grace was absolute and entirely merciless. Richard, her former estate lawyer, did exactly as I commanded. Terrified of losing his own legal license, he handed over every forged document, fake signature, and illegal wire transfer directly to the federal prosecutor and the Internal Revenue Service. She managed to avoid prison time by fully cooperating against Terrence, but the financial devastation was total. The bank foreclosed on the ancestral family home the very next day, locking her out with nothing but the clothes on her back. Today, my mother lives in a cramped 200-square-foot studio apartment on the far outskirts of Chicago. To pay off her massive mountain of court fees and federal fines, the woman who once hosted high society country club galas now works a minimum wage job scanning items at a local retail big box store. She has to stand on her feet for 8 hours a day, wearing a scratchy polyester uniform and a plastic name tag. The wealthy friends she spent her entire life trying to impress actively pretend they do not know her when they walk past her cash register. As for Amanda, the golden child, finally had to face the brutal reality of the real world. Her divorce from Terrence is a messy, drawn-out nightmare of federal asset seizures and aggressive debt collection. Without Catherine's stolen money or a fake millionaire husband to prop her up, Amanda was forced to sell off her remaining designer bags just to afford a tiny, poorly insulated rental unit. For the first time in 30 years, she actually had to learn how to work for a living. She took a job as an entry-level receptionist at a dental office. She spends her days answering phones, fetching coffee, and organizing schedules for the exact type of working-class people she used to look down on. She tried to reach out to me once through a temporary burner email address, crying about how hard her life was and begging for a small loan to cover her utility bills. I deleted the email without reading past the first line. My boundaries are permanently sealed, and my bank accounts are entirely closed to her. I am currently standing on the sprawling limestone balcony of my newly purchased waterfront home. The property sits on a private, pristine stretch of the Florida coastline, a sanctuary I bought completely in cash with my own earned wealth. The warm ocean breeze carries the sharp, clean scent of salt water and blooming night jasmine gently ruffling the silk fabric of my evening gown. I look out over the dark water, watching the silver reflection of the moon dance across the crashing waves. For 33 years, I carried the suffocating heavy weight of my family's toxic judgment. They told me I was a massive disappointment because I did not fit their shallow materialistic mold. They relentlessly mocked my career, belittled my independence, and tried to convince me I was unworthy of basic respect, simply because I refused to play the role of the obedient, invisible scapegoat. But standing here tonight, bathed in the quiet luxury of a life I built from the ground up, I realize a profound and unshakable truth. You cannot be a disappointment to people you no longer respect. Their metrics for success were built entirely on lies, stolen money, and incredibly fragile egos. My success was built on sleepless nights, relentless ambition, and absolute integrity. I did not just survive their malicious attempt to ruin me at that airport. I used their cruelty as the exact catalyst I needed to ruthlessly cut them out of my life and fully claim the global empire I built with my own two hands. I lift my crystal glass of vintage champagne, raising it high toward the endless horizon. The ultimate revenge was not just seeing my family hauled out of a luxury resort in handcuffs. The true lasting revenge was building a life so incredibly magnificent, so entirely saturated with peace and absolute power, that their permanent absence is not a loss. It is a profound, beautiful liberation. If you have ever had to set a harsh boundary and cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your own peace, let me know your story in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe that sometimes the family you build for yourself is far stronger than the one you leave behind. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, your worth is never defined by people who are too blind to see it. Looking back on that day in Miami, the greatest lesson I learned is that your worth is never defined by the people who try to break you. For 33 years, I believed that if I just worked harder, gave more, and stayed quiet, my mother and sister would finally value me. I allowed their constant disrespect to dictate my self-esteem. But the moment they left me stranded, I realized something profound. You cannot earn the respect of people who only see you as a resource to exploit. The moment I stopped seeking their conditional approval was the exact moment I stepped into my true power, building a successful life. Achieving financial independence and creating a global career were not just acts of survival. They were my ultimate armor. I learned that setting absolute immovable boundaries is not a punishment for others, but a necessary protection for yourself. True liberation comes when you realize that walking away from a toxic family is not a failure. It is the ultimate victory of self-love. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace and build a better life? Please share your